Hi, I'm Arlena. After my mom's funeral, I came home to find my suitcase in the hall and a note that said, "You're not family." No warning, no goodbye, just silence and a locked door. But what hurt more wasn't being kicked out. It was realizing I'd been used all along. The months I spent caring for her, erased, the house I called home, listed for sale behind my back, and that note? It was just the beginning. What else were they hiding? And why was I the one they needed out of the picture? I looked at the note again, folded it carefully, and slid it into my wallet. If they wanted a war, I wouldn't start it, but I sure as hell would finish it. The house still smelled faintly of lemon floor polish, Mom's scent. She liked things clean, polished, in order. But that scent couldn't cover up the rot underneath, not the staleness of silence. Not the chill that settled into my bones as I stood there, surrounded by everything that was once mine, now reduced to 4 battered suitcases and a hallway of judgment. The door had barely closed behind me when I heard the click of a new lock. I turned slowly. No one in sight. No apology. Just the subtle message. I was no longer welcome. I didn't call out, didn't pound the door. I just walked to the porch like a ghost, floating through the remnants of my life. The sky was overcast, hanging low like an accusation. I sat down on the porch swing, careful not to disturb the stillness of a house that was already trying to forget me. The screen door creaked slightly behind me, but no one came out. No one even peeked through the blinds. Mom had been gone less than 24 hours. A week ago, I was helping her sip tea, adjusting pillows under her neck, tracking her medication. I slept on the floor by her bed those last nights, just in case she needed water or comfort or someone to hear her whisper her regrets. Lorana had shown up only once near the end, wearing a silk scarf and crocodile tears. She stayed an hour, took a few selfies with Mom holding her hand, and left with the last bottle of Mom's favorite perfume. Now, she was the queen of this house, while I sat outside it. I glanced down at my phone, battery at 19%. I plugged in the portable charger. Thank God I'd remembered to throw that in my tote, and opened the group chat, Vexley Family Matters. Except it wasn't there anymore. Gone. I scrolled again. Still nothing. I clicked on my cousin Maggie's contact and typed quickly, "Hey, did the group chat get deleted?" The reply came back fast. "No, hun. They just made a new one. Vexley Immediate only. I thought you were in it." I stared at the screen. My fingers tingled. I didn't reply. So that was that. They'd cut me out digitally, too. Not even a fake excuse or, "Oh, sorry, must have been a tech glitch." Just gone. Deleted, like I never existed. I sat there for another hour as the clouds rolled in. It started to drizzle, then rain for real. I didn't move. Didn't feel like I deserved to. By 9 p.m., the cold had crept under my skin and settled in my bones. I stood slowly, picked up my tote, and dragged my suitcases to the car. It took 2 trips. No one offered to help. No one even opened a door to see where I was going. The inside of my car smelled like old receipts and lavender hand lotion. I curled up in the driver's seat, coat pulled tight around me, watching water bead along the windshield. I remembered Mom's voice from just a week ago, raspy, half-conscious. "Promise me. Stay here after Lena. This house should be yours." I had promised. Right then, with her hand in mine, and now I was sleeping in my car 2 blocks away from the house I'd spent months tending, like some stray they finally had the nerve to push out after getting what they needed. I woke with a cramp in my neck and a sick taste in my mouth. Morning fog blurred the windows. I wiped a space clean with my sleeve and watched as the lights flicked on inside the house. She was making coffee. She always used Mom's old ceramic French press. I wondered if she even knew how Mom liked her brew. Strong, with a splash of almond milk. Not that it mattered now. She had the kitchen, she had the rooms, she had the damn deed for all I knew. I checked my phone again. 10%. Enough. I opened my email, searched for hospice. Sure enough, the PDF was there, my name on every form, my initials, my contact info, my signature next to every directive. I scrolled to the end, the final line, "Primary caregiver designation, Arlena Vexley." I stared at those words for a long time, then clicked Compose. Subject, Legal question, house ownership and caregiving. Body. I'm reaching out to ask about rights related to home occupancy and property when the primary caregiver was not on the deed, but responsible for full-time end-of-life care. Are there grounds for contesting current ownership based on contribution, caregiving, or verbal promise from the deceased? I didn't hit send, not yet, but the cursor blinked at me like a dare. I hit save draft. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The rain hadn't stopped since dawn. It fell in a dull, constant rhythm that matched the pulsing behind my eyes. I parked 2 blocks away from the law office, not because there weren't spaces closer, but because I needed the walk. The steady drizzle gave me just enough cover to feel invisible for a few minutes. The will reading wasn't supposed to include me. That much was obvious. I hadn't received an invitation, no email, no call. But I knew when it was happening. Small towns have big mouths, and someone from the hospice center had mentioned it offhand while handing me a condolence card. I walked in 10 minutes late on purpose. The lobby was hushed, lit with the soft yellow glow of sconces that made everything feel staged. I stepped into the back of the room and sat down quietly, coat damp against the fabric chair. Lorana didn't turn around, but her shoulders stiffened when I entered. She knew I was there. So did the attorney, a man named Dennis Hartley, whose office used to handle my mother's tax filings. He looked up from his papers for half a second, then continued reading without a word. The estate, in its entirety, home, accounts, belongings, is hereby granted to my eldest daughter, Lorana Vexley. I waited for the rest, for my name, for some mention, a clause maybe, anything. There was nothing, just a clean, deliberate erasure. I swallowed the sting in my throat and looked around the room. A few distant relatives nodded politely when the reading ended. Most avoided my eyes altogether. I stayed seated for a moment longer than necessary, watching Lorana accept a small manila folder from Mr. Hartley. She looked like she was picking up dry cleaning. In the hallway, near the exit, was a glass display case filled with decorative items, family photos, keepsakes, things Mom had dropped off years ago when she updated her estate plan. It wasn't meant to be seen by visitors, just stored until needed. That's where I saw it. On Lorana's hand, the ring, oval opal, gold band, slightly worn on one side. Mom used to wear it every day until the swelling in her fingers made it too tight. She'd taken it off in front of me, 3 years ago exactly, and handed it over with a soft smile. "This one's yours," she'd whispered, "because you stayed when it got hard." I stepped closer, voice low. That ring was meant for me. Lorana didn't blink. "She changed her mind," she said smoothly, admiring her hand like she'd just stepped out of a department store catalog. "Said I earned it. Maybe she just didn't want to hurt your feelings." The words were sharp, but her tone was worse, casual, practiced, dismissive. "She was barely conscious," I said. "She couldn't have said that." "You're right, she was slipping. But you know how guilt makes people act. Maybe she realized she'd misjudged me." I stood there, silent, not because I lacked something to say, but because I knew none of it would change a thing. She wasn't interested in truth. She wanted reaction, and I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Instead, I turned and walked out, feeling the heat rise up my chest as I crossed the wet sidewalk and climbed into my car. For several minutes, I sat behind the wheel, engine off, hands trembling slightly on my knees. I opened the glove compartment and pulled out my old leather-bound notebook, the one with the bent corner and coffee stain on page 2. I flipped past half-used pages until I found a blank one and started writing. Who signed the official will? Was Mom's journal still in her bedroom? Who witnessed the signature? Hospice staff? Any of them ever speak to Lorana directly? Medical records? Who handled her sedation schedule? It wasn't anger that pushed the pen, not just that. It was clarity. I had spent the last few days trying to believe there had been some kind of misunderstanding, that it was grief, stress, old tension that made them treat me like this. But now, the pattern was too clean, too organized. This wasn't emotional distance. It was a plan. A slow, calculated removal of me from everything that had once defined who I was. I checked the time. 3:42 p.m. outside. The rain had lightened to a mist, but the wind had picked up. A trash can lid rolled down the sidewalk like it was trying to flee the scene. I leaned back against the seat and stared at the ceiling of the car, whispering under my breath, "She left me something. I know she did." The thought hung in the air like steam from an open cup, not proof, but not fantasy either, and I wasn't going to wait for someone else to admit it. I folded the notebook closed, shoved it back into the glove box, and drove off, not toward the motel, not toward the cemetery. I drove toward the house, not to break in, just to look, to remember the layout, to imagine where she might have hidden something. The old wooden box, her journals, something taped under the drawer. Because whatever truth was left, it wasn't going to come to me. I was going to have to go find it. I parked one street over from the house, cutting the headlights before pulling into a side lot near a hedge of overgrown laurel. The same lot I used when I didn't want Mom to see my car during the hospice days. Some habits linger. The sun hadn't broken through, but the rain had stopped. The air was heavy, dense with that mossy wetness unique to Oregon spring. I pulled my hood over my head, walked the sidewalk slowly, and rang the doorbell with a firmness that surprised even me. Lorana wasn't home. I'd made sure of that by checking her social post earlier. Lunch meeting in Springfield. Monday, it said, next to a half-filtered photo of a salad she wouldn't finish. Instead, it was her husband, Evan, who opened the door. He looked caught off guard, holding a coffee mug and half-dressed in weekend sweats. Arlena. Hi, I just need 10 minutes to grab the rest of my stuff, I said evenly, not asking permission. He blinked, then stepped aside. Sure, she's not, just be quick. I nodded and walked past him, avoiding the corners where our family photos used to hang. They were gone now, replaced by bland art prints and a set of minimalist coat hooks. Upstairs, I moved directly to my old bedroom, the one I'd taken over when Mom got too weak to sleep alone. The sheets were gone. The air smelled like citrus cleaner and paint. They were erasing me even faster than I thought. I went to the bed first, kneeling down and checking underneath. Nothing. Just a pair of Lorana's storage bins labeled Christmas linens and out of season. No sign of the old wooden box that Mom used to keep under there. The one she swore held nothing important, which meant it probably held everything. I stood slowly, brushing dust from my jeans, and opened the closet. A few wire hangers. One box labeled keepsakes. Most of it was hers. Yearbooks, a wine-stained bridesmaid dress. But in the back drawer of the built-in shelf, tucked flat under a stack of holiday cards, I felt the edge of something taped down. A manila folder. I peeled it free. Inside, folded twice, was a sheet of lined paper. Her handwriting, uneven, delicate, looped across the top. To be considered if anything changes. Below that, a handwritten will, dated 6 months ago. It wasn't notarized, but it was unmistakable. She had named both daughters as co-owners, split the estate evenly, and in the middle, scrawled in darker ink, was one paragraph that hit me harder than any legal phrasing ever could. I want Arlena to remain here if she chooses. Her sacrifices during my illness were without complaint and should be honored. I sat down right there on the carpet, read it once, then again, then a third time. My throat tightened. Not because it changed everything, but because it proved I hadn't imagined the closeness between us. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't lying. I was loved. It was never about the house. It was about being remembered for who I really was. I pulled my phone from my jacket and took a photo. Then I folded the paper neatly, placed it inside my inner pocket, and stood. As I came down the stairs, Evan was still in the kitchen on a call. He barely looked up. "Thanks," I said, and let myself out. The wind had picked up. Clouds still hung low, but the street felt brighter, lighter. I walked back to my car, unlocked the door, and just as I was about to climb in, I heard someone call out, "Arlena?" I turned. Across the street stood Mrs. Cleary, our neighbor from 3 doors down. She wore a long beige coat and held a plastic grocery bag in each hand. Her hair was tucked into a knitted beret, and her eyes squinted like she hadn't spoken to me in years. "I was hoping I'd see you," she said, stepping closer. "I didn't think you still lived here." "Barely," she replied, with a short laugh. "Listen, I know it's not my place, but your mother, she didn't want to sign that will. I was here the night Lorana and Evan came over with that notary guy. She was upset, said she needed more time. I remember her exact words. Don't make me do this. I felt something tighten around my ribcage. I'm sorry, she added quickly. I should have said something sooner, but it's not easy, you know? They made me feel like I'd imagined it. You didn't, I said. My voice was steady, maybe steadier than it had been in days. You didn't imagine anything. She nodded, her lip trembling slightly. If anyone asks, I'll tell them what I saw. I thanked her, not with words, but with a look I hoped said everything. Then I got in my car and shut the door gently. The sun was dipping low now, casting a gold line across the dashboard. That night, I didn't sleep in the car. I found a small Airbnb 5 miles out. Cheap, quiet, clean enough. I made tea in the microwave, sat cross-legged on the bed, and stared at the folder I'd brought with me. I'd read the will again. I'd replayed Mrs. Cleary's words at least a dozen times. And then I picked up the phone. I called the number from the legal firm Mom had used years ago. A man answered, professional and calm. Calver Law, this is Derek. I cleared my throat. Hi, my name is Arlena Vexley. I need to speak with attorney Derek Calver. You're speaking to him, he replied. How can I help? It's about a will, I said, pressing my palm flat to the bedspread, and a house I was erased from. There was silence, then. Go ahead. I didn't tell him everything, not yet, but I told him enough. The will I found, the caregiving, the neighbor, the feeling in my gut that none of this was an accident. He didn't make promises, but he listened. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like someone was really hearing me. I hung up the call and sat still for a long minute, feeling the faint hum of the fridge in the little studio apartment above the garage. It wasn't much, a bed, a sink, a hot plate, but it was quiet, and it was mine. The soft knock of rain on the skylight had become familiar now, a kind of dull white noise that let me think. Later that evening, Derek called back. His voice was sharper now, clipped in that way lawyers get when something doesn't sit right. We need to meet, he said. That document you found, it's enough to raise some serious questions. Coercion, undue influence, maybe even fraud. If we can show that your mother was pressured, there's precedent. What does that mean for me? I asked, sitting at the small folding table I used as a desk. It means the current will might not be the one that stands, he said, if we act fast. He paused before adding, but you should see this first. He sent a link to my email, a real estate listing. There it was, Mom's house, the house I cooked in, cleaned, cried in, listed publicly like a piece of used furniture. Cleaned out for quick turnover, it read, perfect for investors, owner managed, private showings available by request. Contact Lorana Vexley. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. My name wasn't there, not in the listing, not on the deed, not even in the legal narrative anymore. But Lorana's name was in bold. She had wasted no time turning grief into business. I didn't cry. I didn't even speak. I just stood, grabbed my jacket, and left. I didn't tell Derek I was heading there. I didn't need a plan. I just needed to look again, to see how much of me had been erased. The street was quiet when I pulled up, the sun setting behind clouds that looked like soaked cotton. I parked a few houses down, took a slow breath, and walked up to the front steps. The door opened before I could knock. Evan. He blinked in surprise. Hey. I'm just here to pick up the rest of my stuff, I said. He opened the door wider and stepped aside. She's not home. I figured. I went straight to the living room. The wall where our family photos used to hang was empty. Just tiny nails and sun-bleached outlines remained. There had been a picture there, a candid one of me and Mom in the backyard, planting tulips. Her laugh was caught mid-motion. It was her favorite, gone. The bookshelf next to it had been stripped bare. Only Lorana's wedding photo remained, next to a vase with silk orchids. In the hallway, the linen closet had been reorganized. No sign of the quilt my grandmother made. No trace of the perfume Mom used to keep tucked behind the towels. I opened drawer after drawer, cupboard after cupboard, like I was searching for a ghost. Upstairs, in what used to be Mom's room, I stood at the doorway and didn't step in. It didn't feel right. Not anymore. I walked back down, quietly. Evan was in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove. You find what you needed? No, I said. I didn't. He didn't ask for details. Back in my car, I pulled out my phone and texted Derek. Me. Do you still need receipts? Derek. Everything. Every note, every text, every invoice from when you were living there. Hospice emails, utilities, anything with your name. I hesitated, then typed. Me. I'll get it to you tonight. He replied instantly. Derek. Good. If they want to sell that house, they'll have to drag you through a courtroom first. I didn't smile. Not really. But the pressure in my chest shifted. It wasn't gone, but it had shape now. Direction. For months I had let grief hold the pen. Let silence write the ending. Not anymore. I went back to the apartment, made coffee, and pulled out a plastic folder I hadn't touched in weeks. It had everything. My leave of absence form from work, the hospice intake packet, receipts from prescription pickups, screenshots of conversations with Mom. I organized them one by one, printed extras, scanned what I could, labeled folders. At 1 a.m, I uploaded it all to a shared drive and sent the link to Derek with a single line. Attached are all materials related to Arlena Vexley's care of Marlene Vexley, deceased. Then I sat back, stared at the wall, and whispered to no one. If you think I'm just going to fade out, you really don't know me. The morning after I sent Derek the documents, I got a text from Lorana, just 4 words. Coffee? 1 o'clock. Maze. Maze Cafe was neutral ground. Downtown, always busy, impossible to make a scene in without getting side-eyed by strangers sipping oat milk lattes. I stared at her message, then typed, then deleted, then typed again. See you there. The weather had turned that kind of chilly, where the wind doesn't scream. It just whispers threats you can't ignore. I wore a navy jacket and brought my leather-bound receipt folder. No frills, no excess. Just the facts. She was already there when I arrived, perched at the corner table like she owned the building. Designer sunglasses on the table, chai tea untouched. She didn't get up when I walked in, just looked me up and down and said, You look tired. I sat. I've been busy. She didn't blink. I figured. There was a pause long enough for the waitress to bring water and disappear again. Then Lorana leaned forward and got to the point. She gave it all to me, she said, voice like ice. Because you were always the helper, not the heir. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I let it hang between us like the stench of something rotten. When I finally spoke, my voice was even. She also told me weeks before she passed that she didn't want a single thing sold without my say-so. She was sick, Lorana said with a shrug. She said a lot of things near the end. And yet she remembered to leave you the house, the ring, and apparently my place at the table. She smiled. Because I earned it. That's not what hospice said when they billed me for everything, I replied, reaching into my bag. I pulled out the folder, unzipped it, and slid a copy of the hospice summary across the table. Every invoice came to me, every payment cleared from my account. She glanced at it, barely, then rolled her eyes. So what? You wanted a trophy for being the good daughter? No, I said. I wanted my name not erased from the life I helped hold together. Lorana leaned back, folding her arms. This is just about guilt. You were always soft, always trying to fix things. You think it's weakness to care? I asked. That's why you never noticed when people started backing away from you. She tilted her head. People like who? The ones who saw you pressure her, the ones who heard her cry after your visits. You pushed her, and now you're pushing me. Silence. I kept my gaze steady. If you go through with selling the house, I'll take everything, documents, receipts, statements, witnesses, and hand it straight to the probate judge. You think a folder of bills is going to stop this? No, I said, but it'll slow it down. And when people start asking why the will changed 6 months before she died, why the power of attorney transferred with no doctor's letter, you'll be the one answering. Her fingers tightened around the ceramic mug. You're unbelievable. On the contrary, I said. I'm exactly what you believed I wasn't. I stood. If you touch one more thing that belonged to her, I'll bury you in court filings. I've got time. I've got proof. And this time, I'm not staying quiet. I left her sitting there. As I stepped outside, the late afternoon light filtered through thin clouds, casting long shadows on the sidewalk. I didn't rush. I didn't look back. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Derek. "You all right?" he asked. She didn't take it well. "She's not going to back off, Arlena." "I know." "Be ready," he said. "They won't fight fair." I walked to my car, unlocking it with the remote. They never did. That night, I didn't sleep much. I didn't cry either. I went through Mom's old emails, cross-checked dates, flagged names I recognized. I built a spreadsheet. I labeled every PDF, and sometime around midnight, I whispered the phrase I'd been avoiding for weeks. She didn't get to rewrite the ending. By 7 the next morning, I was already at the co-op down the street, grabbing almond milk and a few things to keep me going through the long days ahead. I hadn't eaten much lately, but I figured if I could get something warm into my system, maybe I'd stop waking up with my jaw clenched. I barely made it past the bulk bins before I caught it, the hush of two voices falling quiet the second I passed. The way one woman tilted her head, just slightly, like I was some sad story she couldn't look away from. A man by the cafe register gave me the kind of tight smile people reserve for the unstable or the recently widowed. Except I wasn't either. I tried to shake it off until I heard someone softly call my name. I turned. It was Janine, a woman who used to live 2 doors down from Mom. She looked like she didn't want to be seen talking to me. Can I just say something?" she whispered. "Sure." "I heard from someone who heard from your sister. She's been saying things, like maybe you weren't well, that you had some kind of episode during your mom's care, that you weren't handling things, mentally." It landed like ice water down my back. "She's saying I was unstable?" Janine looked away. I didn't believe it, but others might. I nodded. "Thanks for telling me." I left my card in the aisle and walked straight out. By the time I got home, I'd missed a call from my landlord. I returned it while still standing in the entryway. "Arlena," he said, voice overly polite. "Someone reached out anonymously expressing concern about your emotional state. Said you might not be safe to live alone." I could hear the hesitation in his tone, the legal tiptoeing. He didn't believe it either, but he didn't want it on his hands if something went wrong. "I'm fine," I said, "and I have documentation to prove it if it ever comes to that." "That's not necessary, I'm sure. Just letting you know." "Right, thanks." I hung up and sat down hard on the edge of the couch. For the first time since this all started, I didn't feel hurt. I felt insulted. If Lorana couldn't beat me with lawyers, she'd try to chip away at how people saw me. Make me into a fragile figure, someone to be pitied, or worse, ignored. I pulled out my phone. "Document everything," Derek had said. "From now on, assume anything can be used against you." I created a folder labeled Discredit Campaign and started logging timestamps, messages, names. By late morning, I couldn't sit still, so I drove across town to the small clinic where Mom used to get her labs done. The receptionist had changed, but the nurse hadn't. She saw me, and her mouth fell open. "Arlena?" I gave her a soft smile. "I was in the area." We chatted for a few minutes, small talk, cautious. Then, just as I was about to leave, she glanced around the waiting area, lowered her voice and said, "Your mom." Near the end, she told me something, that she felt cornered, regretted signing things she didn't understand. She looked scared, not sick. I stared at her. She said, "I wish Arlena were in the room." That's the part that stuck with me. I managed a thank you, got in my car, and sat behind the wheel until my knuckles stopped shaking. When I got back to the apartment, I boiled water for tea and sat at the table with my laptop. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I opened a blank document and titled it, "Formal Challenge to Estate Administration, Potential Fraud and Defamation, ICC'd Derek, the real estate firm, and the county probate court." Attached the folder of receipts, screenshots, and now, a statement with my landlord's voicemail transcribed and the nurse's name listed under Supporting Witnesses. My hands didn't tremble. I hit send. Then I turned off my phone, poured the tea, and finally, let my body rest. That night, for the first time since the funeral, I slept through the night without waking. I woke to the sound of soft rain tapping the windows and the faint hum of tires passing on the wet street below. There was something oddly peaceful about it, like the universe was giving me just one moment of calm before asking me to rise again. I stretched, stood, and shuffled to the mailbox unit just outside the apartment. Mostly flyers and circulars, nothing urgent, until I saw it. A small padded envelope, no return address, light as air. I opened it right there on the porch, hands already bracing for something unexpected. Inside, a USB drive, black, unmarked, no note. I brought it inside, locked the door behind me, and plugged it into my laptop with the same caution one might use to handle a ticking box. One file. Victor Confession, March 2019. I clicked play. It opened with a shaky camera view, like someone had propped up a phone on a stack of books. Victor's face appeared, older than I remembered, stubble creeping across his jaw, eyes darting as if someone might burst in on him mid-sentence. He leaned in. "If you're watching this..." I guess she finally crossed the line. He took a deep breath, then another. I didn't know what she was planning at first. She told me her mom wasn't thinking straight and that Arlena, he said my name with a kind of guilty reverence, was going to take advantage of the situation. I believed her, I did. But then I was there. When she told Marlene she had to update the will, said it was just paperwork, routine. But she didn't let her read the whole thing. He looked away from the camera, voice quieter now. She made it sound like Arlena was going to force her way into the deed, that she was emotionally unstable. She even said, "We just need Mom to sign it before Arlena tries anything crazy." That was the exact line, and I went along with it, until I couldn't anymore. He sighed and looked directly into the lens again. "I'm sorry. I should have spoken up sooner. I should have done more." The video ended. No flashy conclusion, no signature. Just a silent black screen and the weight of what I just heard settling like stone in my chest. There was more on the drive. A scan of a letter, tucked in a subfolder titled simply, "For Arlena." I clicked. My mother's handwriting filled the screen, slanted, careful, warm. "To my Arlena, if this finds you too late, I'm sorry. I tried to make it right, but I didn't know how to protect you from your sister without setting fire to everything. I wanted peace in my last months, even if it meant sacrificing clarity. That was my mistake. You were always the one who showed up. I didn't say it enough, but I saw you. I felt your care every single day. I hope you carry that knowledge like armor. Forgive me for being silent. It wasn't because you were wrong. It was because I was afraid. Love. Always. Mom." I sat back, tears prickling but not falling. There was no shock, not anymore. Just a slow, humming validation. I wasn't wrong. I wasn't imagining things. And my mother hadn't forgotten me, she'd just been cornered. I printed the letter, slid it into a folder, and added it to the growing pile I was assembling for Derek. With it went Victor's video, the hospice records, every invoice, and now, witness accounts that could dismantle everything Lorana had tried to build. The next afternoon, I met Derek at his office. He flipped through the papers, pausing at the letter, then replayed Victor's video twice. The second time, he didn't even blink. When the screen went dark, he exhaled slowly and leaned back in his chair. "This isn't just a probate case anymore," he said. "This borders on fraud, maybe even coercion." I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. My silence was no longer passive, it was tactical. I'd spent weeks defending my grief, justifying my presence, proving my love. Now, for the first time, I wasn't pleading. I was building a case, quietly, strategically, brick by brick. We set a date for the formal filing. I went home and rewrote my witness list, added timestamps, organized statements. The same rain from earlier hadn't let up, but it felt different now. It wasn't drumming like a warning. It was steady, like a beat I could follow. The rain let up the next morning, but the clouds still pressed low like the sky hadn't decided whether it wanted to cry again or just hang there and brood. I dressed in a soft gray blouse, the one Mom always said made me look composed no matter what, and drove to the courthouse with a folder tucked tightly against my ribs. Derek met me in the lot. He didn't offer a speech, just nodded, eyes sharp behind his glasses. We walked in together up 2 flights, and handed over the paperwork at 9:42 a.m. By noon, Lorana was officially served, right at her desk in the bank's mortgage division. I didn't see it happen, but I imagined her signature stiffen, her eyes scanning the envelope with the kind of dread you can't rehearse away. I didn't need to witness it. The point wasn't her reaction. It was the fact that she'd finally been forced to face something she couldn't rewrite. Derek's voice cut through the quiet tension of the filing room. "We included the 2018 statement of intent from your mother, the one about you being added to the deed." I nodded. "Twist the knife, politely." He smirked at that but said nothing more. We both knew this wasn't just about a house anymore. It never had been. That afternoon, a mediation request came through her attorney. A conference room downtown, sterile and hollow, with a pitcher of lemon water in the center of the table like it could absorb the tension for us. She walked in late. Lorana had always been glamorous in a curated sort of way, but now the polish looked cracked. Foundation couldn't hide the dark circles or the way her hands fidgeted with the clasp on her purse. "Let's not drag this through court," she said without a greeting. I laid the folder flat between us and opened it. First, the printed letter from Mom. "If this finds you too late, know that I tried." Next, a still from the video, Victor's face frozen in mid-confession. Then the nurse's statement, signed and notarized. She skimmed each page with a flick of her eyes. No denial, just silence, and a tightening jaw. "This doesn't prove coercion," her lawyer offered. "No," Derek replied, "but it proves there's enough reasonable doubt to justify halting the sale, and that opens the door to full discovery." I leaned in, resting my elbows gently on the table. "I don't want her car. I don't want the dishes. I don't even want the ring. But I want that house, and I want your silence after." Lorana gave a soft laugh, the kind that tried to land as superior but came out frayed. "You want to live in that sad little box forever? Fine. Buy it back." I looked her in the eye. "I'll pay the remaining mortgage, not a cent more. You took enough." Her lawyer whispered something, but she waved him off. Then, without looking at me again, she nodded. The agreement was written up on the spot. I would assume the final balance on the house loan. She would relinquish all claims to the property. A clause was added. Neither party would disparage the other in any future legal, professional, or personal setting. She signed with her usual dramatic swoop. I signed with a hand that didn't shake. When it was over, she stood, gathered her things, and walked out without a word. I didn't follow. I waited a full minute after the door shut before I exhaled. Derek placed a copy of the agreement in a manila envelope and slid it toward me. "It's done." No confetti fell, no choir sang, just the quiet weight of justice being restored, not as revenge, but as repair. That evening, I returned to the house. My house. The key turned smoothly in the lock. I stepped inside, the walls bare but breathing. The living room still held the smell of lavender oil, the one Mom used to rub on her wrist before bed. I sat on the floor, knees tucked under me, in the center of the empty room. No noise, no echo of voices trying to cut me down. It wasn't the joy I'd expected. It was quieter than that, softer. Closure rarely arrives with fireworks. Sometimes it comes in the form of stillness. Sometimes it's just the click of a lock that finally opens instead of shutting you out. I stayed there for hours, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because I had, at last, chosen to stay. I woke early the next morning, not out of restlessness, but because the quiet felt earned. The sun broke gently through the clouds, not blazing, just enough to make the dew on the lawn shimmer like something sacred. I slipped on an old flannel, grabbed the box of bulbs I'd bought weeks ago, and stepped barefoot onto the backyard patio. The soil was still soft from the recent rain, and as I knelt with the trowel, something in me clicked, like a loose hinge finally falling into place. "The ground feels different when it's yours," I whispered. With each tulip bulb I placed into the earth, I remembered her. Not the version of her caught in hospital gowns or hospice whispers, but the woman who wore straw hats and once told me, "Anything planted with care will bloom stronger, even people." Somewhere between the third and fourth row, I lost count. It didn't matter. I wasn't planting numbers. I was planting permanence. Around mid-morning, I heard soft footsteps on gravel. I stood, brushing dirt from my palms. Emma was at the gate. She was taller now, with the awkward grace of adolescence. She held a card in one hand, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "Hi," she said. "Mom says I shouldn't be here, but I missed you." I opened the gate without a word, just a smile, and let her in. We didn't talk much. She followed me inside, sat at the kitchen table while I made cocoa for both of us. I didn't ask about Lorana, and she didn't offer. That silence for once felt mutual, like we both knew not everything needed naming. After a half hour, she stood to leave and handed me the card. "It's nothing big," she mumbled. "Just something I drew." She waved from the edge of the driveway and walked off, her figure getting smaller with each step. Inside, I opened the envelope. A drawing, crayon tulips, bright reds, purples, yellows. Above them, a wobbly script, "Grandma's flowers for you." I placed it beside my coffee mug and stared at it for a long time, longer than I meant to. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was warmth. And maybe, right now, that was enough. Later that afternoon, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. I paused when I got to Lorana's name. I hovered my finger over it, thought about what I'd say, but there was no speech left in me. No rage, no ache, just silence. I tapped edit, then delete contact. It didn't feel like closing a door. It felt like walking away from one that had been nailed shut for years. That evening, I rearranged a few things in the living room. Nothing dramatic, just subtle shifts. I replaced the generic wall calendar with the photo of Mom and me in the garden, taken the summer I turned 23. She was mid-laugh, hands covered in soil, hair pinned up with a clothespin. Beside it, I framed the letter she'd written, the one that never reached me in time, but somehow arrived exactly when I needed it. "If this finds you too late, know that I tried. I just didn't know how to protect you from your sister." I didn't cry reading it again. I didn't need to. Not all wounds require salt or salve. Some just need space, a bit of light, and time. The house was quiet but not hollow. It no longer echoed with absence. It responded now, with creaks in the floorboards, soft light through curtains, the weight of belonging settling into every corner. I stepped outside one last time before bed, just to check on the tulips. The ground had already taken them, covered them, welcomed them, and when spring came, they'd rise, like me, finally grounded, finally mine. Sometimes healing doesn't look like fireworks. It looks like a woman planting tulips in her backyard, not because she has something to prove, but because she finally has a place to call her own. I used to think that justice meant someone saying, "I'm sorry." But now I know better. Justice is showing up for yourself, even when no one else will. It's keeping the receipts, literal and emotional, and knowing your worth, even when others try to erase it. If you're watching this and you've ever been shut out by the very people you showed up for, let me tell you, you're not weak, you're not crazy, you're not too much, you're just around the wrong people. And maybe today is the day you start changing that. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had to fight to prove that your love, your effort, or your truth mattered? Or maybe you've had to walk away not because you didn't care, but because staying meant losing yourself. I'd love to hear your story. Share it in the comments, whether you're still in the storm or finally breathing in the quiet after. And hey, if this story moved you even just a little, drop a 1 in the comments or let me know where in the US you're watching from. If it didn't speak to you, that's okay too. Tell me why. What would have made it more real for you? And if you'd like to hear more true-to-life stories about strength, family, and finding your voice again, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It helps more than you know, and I'd be honored to have you here for the next story. Until then, stay grounded. You deserve a life that feels like yours. Hi, my name's Odessa. I paid for my sister's promotion party. Every flower, every glass of champagne. And yet, she handed me a tray and made me serve drinks like I was part of the staff. No one said my name, not once. And that wasn't even the worst part. What if I told you that being erased wasn't an accident? It was a family tradition? Would you stay and listen? Or would you leave, like I did? Because what came next changed everything. I arrived 15 minutes before the official start time. just as the hotel staff were finishing the final touches. The chandelier light spilled across the marble floor like gold dust, and the scent of peonies, ones I had personally selected, floated through the air. I handed the valet my keys, clutching a thick envelope that held the final invoice and the guest list I'd printed that morning. My name was on every page, but not once would it be said out loud tonight. Inside, Maribel's assistant gave me a nod, the kind you give to someone you think works for the venue. No eye contact, no welcome. Just a brief look and a gesture toward the ballroom, as if I needed instructions. I walked past her without a word, heels muted by the carpet, eyes scanning the space I'd practically designed. There were no signs of me anywhere. The theme, the playlist, the seating chart, every inch of this place carried my fingerprints, yet I felt like a ghost haunting my own generosity. I moved to the side, standing behind a column near the bar, watching guests begin to trickle in. Laughter, air kisses, firm handshakes. A crowd gathering around Maribel like she was the mayor of Austin. "She's just magnetic," someone whispered. "A woman like that? Born to lead." I didn't interrupt. I didn't even blink. I just stood still, the silence in my chest louder than the jazz quartet warming up near the terrace. An hour in, the room was buzzing. I saw Maribel weaving through the guests, a champagne flute in one hand, the other reaching out for shoulder pats and congratulations. Then she spotted me. Her expression didn't change, not even a flicker of surprise. She walked straight over, and without lowering her voice, said, "You're good at being subtle, right? Grab that tray and help pass these around. Our server bailed last minute." I thought she was joking. For a second, I even half smiled. But she was already placing the tray in my hands. I stood there, stunned, balancing 10 crystal flutes filled with expensive champagne I had paid for. She didn't wait for my answer. She turned back to her crowd, tossing a "thanks, sis" over her shoulder like I was a hotel intern. I didn't want to cause a scene. That's not my way. I told myself to breathe, to keep calm. Maybe she was stressed. Maybe it was just a slip. But then a man, someone I'd met once at a distant cousin's wedding, tapped me gently on the arm and said, "Could you grab me a scotch when you're done with that?" I nodded. Because that's what you do when you've been conditioned your entire life not to make trouble. But inside, I was unraveling. It wasn't the tray. It wasn't even the drink request. It was that no one in that moment, no one, saw me for what I was. A sister, a human being, a person who funded this celebration out of nothing but love and an aching hope to reconnect. Later, I walked toward the far end of the ballroom, hoping for air. I passed a group of older women, sipping wine and complimenting Maribel's speech. How poised she sounded, how driven she must be. My mother, Velma, was among them, laughing, and saying, "She's always been the bright one." I paused at the doorway, hidden by the arch. I didn't expect her to see me, and of course, she didn't. When the slideshow started, the lights dimmed. A montage of Maribel's career highlights played on the grand screen. Her first internship, boardroom victories, corporate retreats, and photos with executives. The crowd applauded at all the right moments. I waited for just one photo of us, of me, of the night I stayed up proofreading her cover letter, of the time I helped her rehearse for her panel interview when she nearly quit. There was nothing, not a single frame, not even a blurry background moment. Even ghosts leave evidence. Apparently, I didn't. Something inside me stilled. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even sadness. It was a final, quiet understanding that I was never part of the picture she wanted to show the world. I stepped out into the hallway, walking past the coats, the catering carts, and a bellhop who didn't even glance at me. The air was cooler out here, untouched by perfume and false praise. I stood there, letting the distant sound of clinking glasses fade behind the heavy doors. I opened my purse, pulled out the printed hotel receipt with my name on it, Odessa Lynn, paid in full, and placed it neatly on the edge of the bar counter where the staff would surely find it. A quiet truth dropped into a noisy lie. I didn't storm out. I didn't slam the door. I just walked, Nobody stopped me, nobody noticed, but for the first time in a long time, that didn't feel like loss. It felt like freedom. By the time I reached the end of the hallway, I hadn't stopped moving. My legs carried me past the restrooms, past the coat check, through the double doors that led to the rear foyer of the hotel. I stood there for a while, letting the quiet hum of a nearby vending machine drown out the applause still echoing from the ballroom. I hadn't planned on going back in, but something about the echo of clapping, too enthusiastic, too polished, pulled me toward the ballroom's cracked door like a string tugging at a bruise. Through the narrow gap, I could see the screen flicker to life. The lights dimmed, and the slideshow began. A curated presentation of Maribel's journey, from her college graduation to early promotions. A few carefully staged photos from what looked like leadership retreats, and one shot where she stood at a podium with a fake mic smile. The crowd clapped in rhythm. I spotted a few heads nodding with admiration. Some even wiped away a tear or two, as if this was a homecoming story, a triumph against odds. "And we extend our deepest thanks," the MC announced, "to Maribel and the entire Meliora Capital team for making tonight possible." My jaw tightened. Not a single mention, not a footnote, not a half sentence tucked at the end. It would have been easier if they'd just ignored me. But this wasn't silence. This was substitution. I hadn't just been left out, I'd been replaced. You can survive being forgotten, I thought. But being rewritten? That's a different kind of grief. The lights came back up to a roar of applause. Maribel smiled, gracious and grand, the way she always did when the world agreed with her version of events. I stepped back from the doorway and leaned against the wall, letting the cool plaster steady my spine. Mom appeared minutes later. I could hear her heels before I saw her. She was headed toward the restroom, chatting with a few older women, her laughter light and unbothered. I waited until she peeled off from the group before stepping forward. She noticed me then, briefly. "Can I talk to you for a second?" I asked quietly. She glanced at her watch. "Make it quick, honey. I told them I'd be right back." I held out my phone, screen lit with the email confirmation from the hotel. Client, Odessa Lynn. Paid, $11,150. Card ending in 3310. "You knew I covered everything tonight, but you stood there and smiled while they thanked her company." She waved her hand as if swatting away a mosquito. "Maribel needs this. You know how hard she's worked." "So have I said, keeping my voice even. "I didn't ask for a spotlight. I asked not to be erased." Mom gave a short, dry laugh. "You always take things too personally. Don't start. Let your sister shine." That sentence did something final to me, like a switch flipping off inside a room that was already dim. It wasn't confusion anymore. It wasn't me misreading things. It was a decision, one she'd already made, one she hadn't needed to explain, because in her mind, it was just obvious. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice or ask how many times she'd chosen Maribel before this. I just nodded, the kind of nod people give when they're done trying to fix what's never been theirs to repair. I returned to the coat check and found an empty bench near the window. The sound from the ballroom faded into the background again, muffled conversations, silverware against china, clinking glass over empty gratitude. I sat there, pulling up the email again, scanned the details, reread them, not because I needed to, but because seeing my name in black and white was the only place it felt real anymore. My name, my money, my silence. I whispered, mostly to myself, if they've written me out, I get to rewrite the ending. For a long while, I just stared at the screen. Then, I forwarded the message to my personal inbox, added the attachments, the full invoice, the final receipt, and renamed the file whoreallypaid.pdf. I didn't send it out, not yet. I just wanted to hold proof. In a world where facts had been replaced with impressions, I wanted to hold something that didn't lie. When I stood, I didn't head for the exit. Not yet. I walked back toward the main room, heels clicking on the tile, spine straighter than when I'd first arrived. I didn't go back to be seen. I went back to watch. This time, not from hope, but with eyes that finally saw. I lingered near the ballroom entrance for a minute, keeping close enough to hear, but far enough to not be pulled into another charade. The laughter coming from inside no longer carried the warmth it used to. It was hollow, overly rehearsed, like a soundbite played on repeat. As I turned to head toward the coat check, a man brushing past bumped into my shoulder. He didn't stop or look back. Not rude, just dismissive, like I wasn't part of the evening at all. I let it go. I was starting to see that being invisible to these people wasn't an accident. It was how they preferred it. Back at the reception table near the foyer, a stack of leftover programs sat in a neat pile. I picked one up out of instinct. Cream-colored paper, embossed lettering, clean layout. I flipped through the list of guests and honorees. Maribel's name was bolded, of course. Underneath the event support section, my eyes caught something that made my stomach tighten. Mira Lynn, event assistant. Mira, not Odessa, assistant, not sponsor, not family, not sister. I read it again, slower this time, as if I'd misunderstood. But there it was. Not a typo. A reframing. A new role assigned to me without permission. A different name handed to me like a borrowed coat that didn't fit. That's when I understood. It wasn't just about leaving me out. It was about replacing me with someone more convenient. Someone who didn't ask questions. Someone who didn't need to be remembered later. Names aren't just spelling, they're decisions. I stepped outside, onto the back terrace, where a few guests were milling around under strings of warm lights. The breeze had picked up, carrying the scent of jasmine and whatever hope I'd still held on to earlier that night. "Hey!" The voice came from behind me. Familiar. I turned and saw Nate, an old classmate from college. He'd been part of our study group senior year. We hadn't spoken in ages, but I remembered him as kind, sharp, a little socially awkward in a charming way. He smiled and gave me a quick hug. "Didn't expect to see you here tonight? You working this?" I blinked. "Sorry?" "You're with the hotel, right?" He gestured toward the staff station. "You looked like you were coordinating stuff earlier, carrying trays and all that." I paused. He meant it as casual, not cruel, but the words landed with weight. I gave him a soft nod. "What made you think I was staff?" He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Well, I saw you walking around earlier with drinks, and your name badge. It didn't say Knox, or even family. It just said Mira. I figured you were part of the team that put this all together. Part of the team, part of the background." I nodded again, but slower this time. "I was involved," I said, "just not in the way they chose to remember." He looked embarrassed. "Wow, sorry, I didn't mean—" "It's okay," I cut in gently. "You weren't supposed to know. That was the point." There was a beat of silence between us. Then I offered him a smile. Not bitter, just finished, and walked past him without saying another word. Out by the stone garden bench, I sat down and let my body settle into the weight of it all. No one had corrected the name. No one had thought twice. And maybe that's what hurt more than anything else. The ease with which I could be rewritten, even by people who once knew me. I pulled out my phone, opened my email app, composed a new message. Subject line: correction. Body: Odessa Lynn, person, sister, sponsor. I didn't add anything else. No explanation, no anger. Just a reintroduction of who I was before they tried to reassign me. I saved the draft. I named it Proof of Self, and I sat there, watching the lights flicker through the trees, thinking how strange it was to feel more real in a saved draft than I ever had at that entire party. By the time I stepped back inside the hotel lobby, the sky outside had darkened to a deep navy blue. I glanced at the oversized clock behind the concierge. 9:42 p.m. The crowd inside the ballroom was still going strong, judging by the music and sudden bursts of laughter echoing through the corridor. I didn't rejoin them. I kept walking until I reached the valet station where I'd left my car. As soon as I climbed in, I locked the door, slid off my heels, and just sat there for a moment with the engine running. There's a kind of quiet that only happens when everything has already been said, at least inside your own mind. I reached for my phone and opened my email app. I wasn't even thinking clearly, just tapping through the inbox like muscle memory. That's when I saw it. Subject line: Final invoice, Driscoll event, 88249. I tapped. The PDF opened instantly. It was the same file I'd already seen earlier in the week when I'd prepaid. But now, this version had been finalized and closed by the hotel's billing department. Under the client section, it read, Meliora Capital. Under payment method, Amex ending in 4462. That's my card. No shared billing. No notes about reimbursement. No indication that anyone else had been involved. They took my money, then rewrote the name at the top. I stared at it for a long time, holding the phone tightly in both hands. Then I took a screenshot and saved a copy to my cloud drive. I forwarded it to myself again, twice, because something in me no longer trusted a single file to stay where I left it. I didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, I leaned my head back against the headrest and muttered, They erased my name, but kept my money. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen counter with a mug of black coffee and my laptop open. The window above the sink let in that soft, gray morning light that only Texas seems to get right. The birds outside were busy with whatever birds do after rain. I logged into my bank portal, not because I didn't believe the invoice, but because I needed to see the trail. What I found wasn't surprising, but it still managed to burn. There was the initial deposit to the hotel, followed by smaller charges across the past 2 weeks. $483.25. Spa Botanica, $897.50. Luxe Couture, Maribel's custom gown, no doubt, $210. Private valet upgrade, all billed to my account, all unauthorized. I clicked into the detailed statements and began printing every page. Not to confront, not to accuse, just to build a file of what was mine, what had been taken. Each sheet that slid from the printer felt like another nail closing a box I would no longer sit quietly inside. When I was done, I labeled a folder in sharp black marker. Evidence, not emotion. I slid everything inside and placed it on the dining table. I added a sticky note on top with 5 words. They chose to forget me. And just below it, I choose to remember. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to send rage-filled texts. The facts were louder than anything I could ever say. Later that afternoon, I called the hotel. A polite young man answered. I kept my voice steady. Yes, I need to confirm who signed the event contract for the promotion party on April 8th. Event code 88249. Ma'am, we can't release that information unless you're the cardholder on file. I didn't hesitate. I am the cardholder. There was a pause. I could hear fingers tapping a keyboard. Oh, yes, I see. Odessa Lynn? That's right. Would you like a copy of the signed contract? Yes, I said. Everything. I want it all in writing. He promised to email it within the hour. I ended the call, slid my phone across the table, and looked out the window. Maribel had thanked everyone except the person who made it happen. She had passed off my generosity as her corporate charm. My mother had smiled and nodded like it was natural. And the guests? They applauded a fiction because it was easier than asking who the credits really belonged to. But numbers don't lie. Receipts don't vanish. And I was done letting them write my part in disappearing ink. I stayed seated at the table a while longer after the call ended. There wasn't anything more to do just yet. The file was building itself, page by page, like a quiet courtroom I was preparing. Outside the kitchen window, the early light was sliding down the fence line, pale and unbothered. My coffee had gone cold. I didn't care. A notification buzzed across my phone screen. I glanced down. It was a tag alert on LinkedIn. I wasn't expecting much. Probably another automatic, congrats to Maribel Knox on her promotion, type of post. But the name in the alert wasn't hers. It was mine. Or rather, it was my face. I tapped the link and waited as the page loaded. There it was. A glossy, filtered photo of Maribel beaming at the center of the room, her arm raised slightly in the middle of a speech. And just behind her, half-blurred, tray in hand, smile halfway between discomfort and obedience, was me. The caption below read, "An unforgettable evening celebrating the vision and leadership of our own Maribel Knox. Thank you to everyone who made it magical." No mention, no tag, but there I was, framed neatly into her story. My expression, my silence, my unpaid labor, wrapped in pixels and marketed like it belonged to someone else. "She didn't just take my money," I said quietly. "She turned me into a prop." I took a screenshot of the post, saved it to the folder I'd started yesterday. Then another alert came through, this time on Instagram. Different platform, same photo, same hollow praise from colleagues who had never spoken to me that night. You'd be surprised how fast something can become official once it's been shared enough times. Around 7:12 a.m., my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from my mother. "Don't make a scene about a photo. Let your sister have this. Let her have this." As if she hadn't already had everything else. I didn't answer right away. I reread the message 3 times. Not because I didn't understand it, because I did. Because it was so exactly like her to say that. Because this was the script I'd grown up with. Let her have this. Don't overreact. You're stronger. You don't need the credit. Be the bigger person. I put the phone down. I paced the kitchen once, then twice. My eyes burned. Not from tears, but from exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that builds when you've been nodding through your own erasure for years. Then I picked the phone back up and typed, "This is the last time you'll ask me to be quiet just so she can be louder." I hit send. There was no reply. Just 3 gray dots that appeared for a few seconds, then vanished. No follow-up, no apology, just silence. And honestly, that told me more than 1,000 words ever could. I sat back down, pulled out my laptop, and opened a clean browser window. Logged into my professional account. Drafted a short post. Simple. Factual. Cold. Sometimes the cost of silence is higher than the price of truth. Full invoices and client details available upon request. No tags, no accusations, no names. But anyone who'd been at that event would know exactly who I was talking about. I posted it, then closed the laptop. Within the hour, the private messages started trickling in. Quiet ones, some supportive, some curious, a few neutral, a handful subtle but sharp. I always thought something felt off about that party. Good for you. Took guts to say something. You handled that with more class than I ever could. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. Because this wasn't about making noise. This was about finally breaking the silence. At 2:17 p.m., an email dropped into my inbox from Maribel's corporate account. Subject line, "What are you doing?" No greeting, no context. Just a single paragraph. "You're making things worse than they are. Stop now before it all comes crashing down." I stared at it for a moment, then calmly clicked forward, sent it to my evidence folder, and marked it with a red flag. I didn't need to reply. Instead, I whispered to the empty kitchen. Now we're both in the picture. After forwarding Maribel's email, I stared at the blinking cursor in my inbox for a long time. Not because I was unsure what to do next. On the contrary, I was certain. I just needed to be precise. Clean. Controlled. I wasn't about to fall into the stereotype of the angry woman lashing out. No, what I had was not rage. It was record-keeping. I opened a new message and began attaching documents from the folder labeled Evidence, not Emotion. The hotel invoice, the payment receipt with my full name, the email thread with the catering team, my floral design notes, the floor plan mock-up, and screenshots from the event group chat. All things that had been invisible to the public, but were very, very real. I didn't write a long introduction, no preamble, no melodrama. Subject line, correction, about last night body. I'm sending this to clarify a few details regarding the recent promotion event held at the Driscoll. Attached are records confirming the funding, coordination, and vendor contracts were handled by me personally. There's no request here, just a record for anyone who values transparency. Respectfully, Odessa Lynn, I BCC'd everyone from the guest list. I didn't pause to wonder how they'd take it. I didn't ask myself if it would change anything, because it wasn't about their opinion anymore. It was about having the truth on record, whether they read it or not. By the time I hit send, it was almost 4:00 in the afternoon. The sun was angling toward the neighbor's rooftop, casting long lines through my blinds. I closed my laptop, stood up, poured myself a glass of water, and sipped it in silence. 20 minutes later, the first reply came in. I had no idea. Thank you for setting the record straight. Then another. Wow, this makes sense now. A third. I feel foolish for applauding a version of that night that clearly wasn't complete. And then this one, from a partner at Maribel's firm. Odessa, I'm sorry for the role we played in your erasure. It wasn't intentional, but that doesn't excuse it. I didn't reply to any of them. I archived each message after reading it once. They weren't apologies I needed, but they were acknowledgments. And acknowledgments, I've learned, are a kind of currency in a world where silence used to be the default. Just after 6, as the sky turned that soft, bruised purple, another notification pinged, this time on LinkedIn, a public post. I clicked it open, already expecting the worst. Instead, I saw my name, not tagged, but centered. For anyone praising the flawless execution of last night's event, credit goes to Odessa Lynn. I saw her running point on everything, from setup to vendor coordination. It's a disservice to pretend she didn't exist in that room. Don't rewrite women like her out of history just because they don't demand the mic. It wasn't signed by someone close. It wasn't a friend doing a favor. It was a guest, a man I barely remembered speaking to, who had taken it upon himself to say something. The post began to spread. Likes, comments, reposts. I didn't reply. I let it stand on its own. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let others say the truth for you, without coaching, without begging. By 7:40 my phone rang. I recognized the number immediately, Maribel's assistant. I didn't answer at first. Let it go to voicemail. Then she called again. I picked up. Her voice was thin, like someone holding a cup with both hands so it doesn't rattle. Hi Odessa, it's Claire. Maribel wants to talk. She's saying it's all been misunderstood, that you're blowing this out of proportion and it's not what it looks like. I didn't even flinch. She's right. A pause. Claire didn't know what to do with that. It's worse, I added. Claire tried to regroup. She'd like to meet, face to face. No drama, just to explain. Can you give her that? No? Another silence, heavier this time. Then Claire said, Okay, I'll let her know. I ended the call and sat back down at my desk. Opened a new document, typed the title in bold, Statement of Withdrawal, subtitle, From the Family That Never Claimed Me. And then I stopped typing, because I'd already said enough. I closed the laptop gently, my hands still resting on the keyboard for a moment longer than necessary. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of old pipes expanding under the spring air. I stood, walked to the sink, and rinsed out my coffee mug. Everything about that act felt strangely ceremonial, like I'd just finished writing a final chapter, even though I knew the story was far from done. It wasn't until later that night, while checking my credit score on a whim, that I noticed something strange. There was a dip, not catastrophic, but enough to make me look closer. I opened the full credit report and scrolled down, line by line, until I found the source. A personal loan from 2019, listed under a boutique financial firm that had since dissolved, $27,000. Marked closed, but still impacting my record. I didn't recognize it. I'd never taken out that loan. I sat up straighter, heart pounding, not in fear, but in disbelief that somehow, even now, there were things I hadn't uncovered yet. The next morning, I called the bank's fraud department. Explained what I'd found, asked them to pull the documentation from that loan. The representative was polite, efficient, and promised to send over the original file via encrypted email. The PDF landed in my inbox just after noon. I opened it, and immediately my stomach sank. There was my name, Odessa L. Knox, my old married name, the one I hadn't used in years, my address, my social security number, and a signature at the bottom of the application. My name, written in a hand that wasn't mine. It wasn't forged sloppily. It was deliberate, familiar, confident enough to suggest whoever signed it had done it before, maybe more than once. That wasn't a forgery, I said out loud. That was familiarity. I forwarded the document to my evidence folder. Then, on a hunch, I messaged an old friend from college who worked in cybersecurity. We hadn't spoken in over a year, but he responded within an hour. "Can you trace the IP address on the original submission?" I asked. "Give me 5 minutes," he replied. 7 minutes later, my phone buzzed. IP originated from a corporate server belonging to Velmark Partners. "That's where your sister used to work, right?" Yes. Yes, it was. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even clench my jaw. I just opened my legal folder and started a new section, Criminal Use of Identity. That same afternoon, between calls and screenshots and folders full of files, I saw a new post pop up on Maribel's social media. A feature in a mid-tier business magazine. Nothing fancy, but enough for her to keep feeding her narrative. She looked polished, controlled, smiling next to her firm's logo. Behind her, on a shelf, was a framed photo from the party. She'd cropped the image, blurred my face slightly, but I recognized my dress, my profile, the way I held that tray. Still using me. Still pretending I didn't exist, while building her brand on the shoulders I used to lend her. I clicked into the post, typed a single comment. "Please take this down. The person you borrowed isn't for sale." Then I closed the tab. I didn't wait for replies. I didn't care who saw it. It wasn't for them. It was for me. That evening, I met with an attorney, a friend of a friend, someone who knew how to handle things quietly but thoroughly. I laid out every printed page, every email thread, every bank statement and invoice. She scanned the materials slowly, methodically. Her brows creased as she reached the loan documents. "If this is accurate," she said, "we're not talking about hurt feelings. This is criminal impersonation, federal territory." I nodded. "I'm not here to ruin her. I'm here to stop pretending I'm okay with being erased." She looked at me, really looked. "And you're prepared for what this might trigger? With your family, publicly?" "She already took everything that mattered," I said calmly. "Now I'm just taking back my name." There was nothing righteous about the way I said it. No heat, no fury, just clarity. I left the meeting with a manila envelope tucked under my arm. On the front, the words, "Petition to open investigation, identity misuse." It felt heavier than its weight, because it didn't just carry proof. It carried the truth they never thought I'd dare name. 3 weeks later, I stood once again in the grand lobby of the Driscoll Hotel, only this time with purpose wrapped in a manila envelope. The last time I'd been here, I'd walked out without a word, leaving behind the version of myself they preferred. Quiet, compliant, forgettable. This time, I wasn't staying long. I was here to finish something, not to witness more of the performance. The concierge looked up as I approached, recognition flickering in his eyes. He straightened slightly. "I'm here regarding the event under Maribel Knox," I said. "Room 4A. He tapped on his keyboard, then paused. "It appears the charges are pending. Catering, sound, floral arrangements. However, the original card on file." "That would be mine," I interrupted calmly. He glanced up. "I need you to cancel every service that hasn't already been paid in full." There was a long pause. He scanned the records again, eyes darting. "Yes, ma'am. You're still listed as the financial guarantor. Would you like a printed confirmation?" I would. He printed 2 copies. I signed one. The moment the pen left the page, I felt the balance shift. Not loudly, not dramatically, just finally. Down the hall, soft music filtered out of the ballroom. I could hear the murmur of voices inside, laughter starting to rise. The party hadn't begun yet, but the facade had already returned. I walked slowly toward the main room, the click of my heels steady against the polished floor. 2 servers passed me with trays of untouched hors d'oeuvres. One glanced at me, then did a double take. I saw him nudge the other. I stopped just outside the entrance. A few staff were rolling away carts. The florist's team, confused, began pulling down half-finished table arrangements. A man in a headset barked into a walkie-talkie, "Hold the slideshow! We're not greenlit yet!" Then I saw her. Maribel standing near the center of the room, perfectly styled. Her expression fell the moment she noticed the shifting energy. And then she saw me. "Odessa?" She said my name like it had thorns. I stepped into the room, handed the concierge copy of the cancellation form to a woman in a blazer who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. "You'll need to find another wallet for tonight," I told my sister. Maribel walked toward me, but her stride lacked its usual command. Her assistant, Claire, trailed behind her, visibly pale. "What is this?" Maribel asked, gesturing at the disassembled chaos behind me. "Why are they stopping everything?" "Because the bill just got real." She glanced at her assistant. "I thought you said this was handled." Claire didn't answer. I reached into my folder and handed Maribel an envelope. "It's all in there. Formal complaint filed. Unauthorized use of identity. Fraud. Cease and desist regarding my image." I paused. "You're welcome to have your party, but you'll need to pay for it yourself." Her mouth opened, then closed. For once, she had no words ready. "This isn't revenge," I said. "It's removal." She blinked, confused. "I didn't think it mattered to you." And there it was. The sentence that told me she still didn't understand. "That's the problem," I replied. "You never think what I am matters." She reached out, maybe to argue, maybe to placate. I didn't let her finish. Instead, I turned and walked, past the waitstaff, the florist, the manager holding a clipboard. None of them stopped me. No one asked questions. One of the caterers clapped, just once. Someone else joined. It wasn't applause. It was acknowledgement. I kept moving. Outside, the sky had shifted to a gold-tinged haze. Early evening sun kissing the tops of buildings like a quiet benediction. My ride was already waiting by the curb. I got in and closed the door without looking back. On the seat beside me was a sealed white envelope with Maribel's name written in my handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No paragraph, no plea. Just one final sentence. "This is the last thing I'll ever pay for you." And it cost me everything. The air felt sharper on the coast. Maybe it was the salt or the way the breeze moved without needing permission. I had only been in Maine for 3 weeks, but each morning I woke up here, I felt less like I was waiting for someone to find me, and more like I'd finally stopped trying to be found. The apartment was modest. 1 bedroom. White walls. Clean windows that caught the morning sun just right. I'd furnished it with care. Nothing fancy, just functional, warm, quiet. The kind of space that doesn't apologize for being small. That morning, like the last 6, I brewed a cup of tea and sat at the small table near the window, watching the sea move in and out. My phone buzzed once. A missed call from Velma. That made 9. She hadn't left voicemails, just the calls, spaced out like someone trying to convince themselves they'd done their part without having to actually say the words. I didn't call back. I didn't block her either. I just let the silence sit where it needed to. I used to think peace came from someone finally saying sorry. Now I know it begins when you no longer need them to. I sipped slowly, the warmth filling my chest. The ache I used to carry behind my ribs had dulled. Not gone, but changed. Like a scar that no longer tugs when you stretch. Later that afternoon, I opened my email to check a few updates from freelance clients. Nestled between subject lines about contracts and invoices was one from a name I hadn't seen in a while. A former colleague from Austin. The message was brief. Heard from someone in HR that Maribel's been placed under formal investigation. They're digging into financials going back 5 years. Thought you'd want to know. I stared at it. Not in triumph, just quiet understanding. Actions find their way back to the people who took them. I didn't reply, didn't forward it, didn't even save it. I closed the email and let it dissolve into the rest of my day. That chapter wasn't mine anymore. As evening settled in, I pulled a worn notebook from the bookshelf and sat down with it in my lap. I hadn't opened it since I left Texas. Inside were scattered thoughts, notes to myself, clipped pages from a past life. Tucked between 2 blank pages was a half-started letter addressed simply, Mom. The handwriting was mine, slanted and precise. I hadn't remembered starting it. I turned to a new page, picked up a pen, and wrote slowly, deliberately, not to send, but to say, You raised a daughter who stayed quiet for love until silence became the lie. That was enough. I closed the notebook. I didn't rip it out. I didn't burn it. I just let it stay there, because some truths don't need to be spoken to matter. Around sunset, I walked down the path behind my building toward the beach. The tide was pulling out, leaving little ridges in the sand like the palm lines of the earth. I sat near the rocks and pulled something from my pocket. A photo. It was from the party, the one that made its rounds online, the one where I stood in the background with a tray in my hands, blurred just enough to look like someone hired for the night. I'd kept it, not out of sentiment, but to remind myself of how far people will go to shrink you down to a version that suits their comfort. I rolled the picture gently, slid it into a small glass bottle, and sealed the top with a cork I'd brought from home. I didn't throw it. I buried it in the sand, deep enough that it wouldn't be found by the next tide. As I stood, a man jogged past on the trail behind me. He nodded. I nodded back. Nothing more, no recognition, no knowing glance. Just 2 people sharing the same light. And that, I realized, was what I'd wanted all along. Not applause, not attention. Just the space to exist as I was, not as I was edited to be. I turned back toward the path, hands empty, heart full enough. Some stories don't end with fireworks. Some just let go, like breath you didn't realize you'd been holding. Final line, some endings don't echo. They exhale. Sometimes the hardest part isn't what they did. It's what you let continue in the name of keeping the peace. I spent years believing that staying silent was noble, that being the strong one meant absorbing disappointment with grace. But silence can be its own kind of betrayal, especially when it keeps others comfortable at your expense. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You don't need permission to take up space in your own story. You don't need applause to prove you were right, and you definitely don't need to carry the weight of a family that only remembers you when it's convenient. I didn't get an apology. I didn't get closure wrapped in a bow, but I got something better, myself back. And in the end, that was enough. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Or been asked to shrink yourself so someone else could shine a little brighter? Let me know in the comments. Just type 1 if this story touched you, or tell me where you're watching from. And if this video stirred something in you, or maybe even healed something, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. There are more real stories coming, and maybe one of them might be yours. End scene. My name's Phoebe. At my sister's wedding, they gave me a cracked plastic chair near the kitchen, marked +1, like I wasn't family, just an accident someone forgot to uninvite. I wasn't in the slideshow. I wasn't in the toast. I wasn't even on the meal list. They smiled for photos while I ate a granola bar beside the mop bucket, and when I posted one picture, just one, they said I was ruining her big day. But how do you ruin something you were never really part of? And why do the people who erase you always act shocked when you finally speak? Would you have stayed quiet? Or would you have posted too? 3 weeks before the wedding, The invitation came. Not in a call. Not in a message. Just a glossy envelope dropped into my mailbox like a supermarket coupon. I opened it on my porch, one hand still clutching a lukewarm coffee. The envelope wasn't addressed by hand. No personal note, not even a scribbled heart. Just a mass-printed line. To our dearest family guest, we're so excited to have you. I stared at it longer than I should have. The word guest stuck in my throat. Not sister, not maid of honor, not even Phoebe. Simone got beloved bridesmaid Simone Redgrave on hers. I know because she posted a photo of it on Instagram. Rhodes Ever After, in bold cursive across her caption. I didn't say anything to Mom when she called later that evening. She asked if I got the invite. I told her yes. She asked if I was coming. I said, wouldn't miss it. But something about that envelope, it told me everything I needed to know. They weren't expecting me to show up. They were hoping I'd know better. The day of the wedding, I arrived an hour early. The sun was warm but not harsh, and everything had that southern storybook glow. You know, crepe myrtles bending like they're praying, white tent canopies fluttering like gospel choir robes. I parked around back so I wouldn't be in the way. I was carrying the gift, a wood and glass decanter set I'd had engraved with Delphine and Austin's initials, their wedding date just beneath. I wrapped it myself, even tied the ribbon. There was also a note in my purse, handwritten. I'd stayed up until 2 a.m., debating whether to sign it with love or all the best. At the check-in table, a young woman with a headset and too much blush flipped through her clipboard. She didn't smile. You're Phoebe Brandt? That's me. She tilted the sheet toward herself, like it would whisper secrets. You're marked under +1. We've set up some overflow seating near catering. Hope that's okay. I blinked. Sure, I'm flexible. She didn't look at me again. A few minutes later, I was seated next to a folding table, holding empty water pitchers. The chair creaked when I sat. I looked down. One of its legs had been taped. Gray duct tape. Right beside me, a heavy kitchen door swung open every 30 seconds, releasing bursts of hot air and the smell of steamed carrots. I sat there, alone, overdressed in a navy dress that wasn't black, because Delphine said black was too harsh for her theme. A server passed by me with a tray of shrimp cocktail and nearly bumped my elbow. He didn't apologize. I didn't say anything either. I just sat there, adjusting the hem of my dress, pretending I was invisible. They say families drift apart over time. This didn't feel like drift. This felt designed. Near the front of the tent, I saw Uncle Walt, who hadn't spoken to Delphine since he sued her ex-boyfriend over a boat. Dead center table. I spotted Aunt Cora, who forgot my birthday 3 years in a row, clinking glasses with the groom's mother. And then there was Simone, standing beside the sweetheart table in matching chiffon, throwing her head back in laughter, the kind that feels planned. Someone behind me called out, loud enough to reach the entire tent. Hey, where's the +1 from catering? I didn't answer. But I knew they meant me. I didn't turn around when I heard it, just sat still. Like if I stayed frozen long enough, I might disappear. The music shifted to something slow, predictable. Wine glasses clinked like it was rehearsed. My chair, still taped at the back leg, creaked whenever I moved. Garlic and overheated chafing dishes wafted from the kitchen. They'd set up a projector near the cake and sweetheart table. Memories of us, the rose gold sign said. People gathered, champagne in hand, already giggling at something sweet. I stayed where I was, one leg over the other, hands in my lap. My name wasn't going to be called. I didn't need to get closer to know. The slideshow began. Childhood birthdays, pool parties, Delphine's prom with the guy she once called a safe bet. That Christmas in Charleston, when I stayed home with the flu. That part, of course, was left out. 42 photos passed before I appeared in a group shot, and even then, my face was cropped out. Not blurred, just gone. Like someone zoomed in for balance. Meanwhile, Simone stood center frame, smiling wide, arms around Delphine and Mom. Someone behind me whispered, Wow, such a beautiful family. I didn't flinch, but something in my chest shifted. Not sharp, just tight, like a lid sealing shut. That night, I lay awake in bed, shoulders aching. Too much fake laughing, too much ginger punch. Sleep wasn't coming. I grabbed my phone, opened Instagram. The hashtag was everywhere. Rhodes ever after. Delphine in her dress. Austin beaming like he hit the jackpot. Guests dancing, crying, toasting. It all looked perfect. I scrolled through 83 public posts. I appeared in one. Not tagged, not posed. Just in the background of someone's table selfie. Walking past, head turned, slightly blurred. Barely there. I zoomed in anyway, studied my face like a fingerprint. Maybe that's how I looked to them all along, I thought. Background noise? No anger, not yet. Just a numbness, like my body understood something my mind didn't. At 2 a.m., I finally got up, walked into the quiet hallway, phone still in hand. Mom had asked me earlier to check out the welcome photo display. I hadn't. Now felt like the time. The air smelled faintly of eucalyptus and frosting, photos clipped to twine, framed in light wood. Mom's touch. Vintage but refined, she'd called it. There it was. A new Brandt family portrait. Dad, Mom, Delphine, Simone, navy and cream outfits, lake backdrop, last year's reunion. I wasn't in it. I blinked, remembered that day, bringing extra chairs, holding Mom's purse while she fixed her hair, standing just outside the frame. I returned to the tent. That photo, I said quietly. Mom looked up from her dessert. When was it taken? She hesitated. Just a second too long. Delphine said the original looked off balance, she said. This one's cleaner. I nodded. Didn't argue. Didn't ask if she thought I wouldn't notice. I just turned and walked away. It wasn't that I didn't belong in the photo. It was that they decided I didn't matter enough to include. I didn't go far. Just enough to breathe. The tent had started dimming, string lights flickering on overhead like polite fireflies. I leaned against a wooden post, wrapped in ivy and white chiffon. The cool fabric against my arm helped steady something in me I didn't know was shaking. Someone inside tapped the mic, and the music faded out. The toast segment was beginning. I'd given them my speech 2 days before. Wrote it by hand. 4 paragraphs, folded neatly inside a cream envelope with my name written in cursive. No flourish, no emojis, just me, just heart. I'd stayed up until past midnight debating the first line. Scratched out, to my sister, 5 different ways before settling on something more neutral. The planner promised she'd include it in the rotation. Of course, she'd said, her smile too shiny to trust. We'll make sure it's read by someone close to her. Now I watched from a distance as the MC, a chipper woman in a red jumpsuit, flipped through a short stack of cards like she was auditioning for a game show. Simone read one. Austin's college friend read another. Then Delphine's boss, who'd flown in from Boston, took the mic and told a story about Delphine solving a crisis with poise beyond her years. The room laughed. My sister wiped away a tear. But no one read my card. They skipped right past it. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched a piece of me get left in someone's pocket, or a trash can, or a purse zipped too tight. I had something to say, I thought. I had something to offer, but silence took the mic. Eventually, I drifted to the bar at the far edge of the tent, poured a splash of wine. Not red, not white, something rosé and forgettable. That was when I saw it. Delphine and Austin at the front table, surrounded by the bridal party, laughing as they opened gifts. A photographer snapped each one. A planner scribbled down notes. Who gave what? Who to thank? Then I saw it. A wooden memory box, ocean blue, lined in soft velvet. Tied with ivory ribbon and a brass clasp. The inside lid held one of our childhood photos. Us on the swing set, grass stains on our knees. I'd added quotes from Mom, old family sayings, little doodles of our old dog. I'd made it myself. Delphine smiled as she opened it. "This must be from Aunt Evelyn," she said. "She always sends the most nostalgic things." Simone nodded, tossing her hair. "Classic Evelyn. She's the memory queen." I didn't say a word. Didn't raise a hand, didn't laugh, didn't cry. Just watched them thank a woman who hadn't even flown in for the wedding. They handed off the moment I made with my hands, I thought. My history, wrapped in someone else's name. There was no one to tell. No one who'd believe I didn't make a fuss because I wanted to ruin the moment, but because I wanted to preserve something of myself. I walked toward one of the back pillars, slipped into its shadow, and leaned there, still, unseen. The music picked up again. Champagne fizzed in flutes. People clapped as Delphine stood for a photo with her in-laws. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the envelope. The speech. I tore it once. No ceremony, just a quick, clean rip. Then another. Then again. 4 pieces. 8. I shoved them back into the purse. This wasn't the first time I was overlooked, but it was the first time I decided not to ask why. Maybe the real gift was realizing silence doesn't mean peace. Sometimes it's just permission. I stood near the draped column, trying to breathe through the tightness in my chest. My eyes landed on the centerpieces, ivory roses with dusty blue accents, arranged exactly like I'd suggested months ago. Back then, Delphine said they looked too funeral. Then she saw the same palette in a bridal magazine, and suddenly they were tasteful. Timeless. Her idea. That's how things go in this family. You offer something quietly. If it works, someone else takes credit. If it doesn't, they act like you were never part of it. A month before the wedding, I found this venue. Not Delphine, not Simone. Me. I was scouting for a client in Beaufort when I came across Oakshade Manor. Big oaks, soft light, a classic southern porch, elegant without being showy. I snapped some photos and texted them to Delphine. "This place is perfect, elegant, shaded, great for photos." She replied 10 minutes later. "Send me the contact. Looks cute." No emoji. No thank you. Just a request. Still, I called the manager, used my company's vendor discount, got them a better rate than what was listed. I thought maybe, just maybe, helping her shine would bring me back into the fold. It didn't. A week later, I was added to the bridal coordination group chat. 8 people total. Delphine, Simone, a few cousins and friends. I chimed in when it made sense. Flower types, seating flow, timeline tweaks. No one reacted to my messages, but I assumed silence meant approval. Then, 2 weeks before the wedding, the group chat disappeared. Not archived, not muted, just gone. I checked again, switched apps, restarted my phone, still gone. I texted Simone. "Hey, can't find the bridal group. Did I get dropped by mistake?" She answered 30 minutes later. "Oh, Delphine wanted to streamline things to bridal party only. No big deal. Hope you understand." Sure. Of course. No big deal. I never brought it up again. Now, watching the table runners I'd chosen ripple under the fan, it hit me. I hadn't told anyone I picked the venue, or the florist, or the tasting date. Guests walked by, admiring the setup. Delphine has such an eye for detail. She always could pull off a vision. She should have gone into event planning. That last one came in different forms throughout the night. She's got that natural elegance. She's the one who carries the family name right. She doesn't half do anything. I stood near the edge of the room, shoulder against the same beam I'd measured weeks ago with the venue manager to check fabric length. The curtain had a small tear, probably from setup. I knew where the backups were. I could have fixed it, but I didn't. Not because I wasn't capable, though yes, I was bitter, but because I'd finally accepted what I was. The invisible architect. The one who lays the foundation, but doesn't get to stand on stage. I don't think they meant to be cruel, not deliberately. It's quieter than that. Like leaving someone out of a speech, not from malice, but because you never pictured them there in the first place. I stayed in my corner while they posed and laughed. I even smiled when Delphine glanced over and gave me a small nod. I nodded back. And in my head, I repeated it like a vow. They erased me from the planning, but not from the foundation. I won't let them forget that. After I nodded back to Delphine, I turned before she could say anything. Or worse, nothing at all. The kind of silence that echoes. I headed toward the cocktail garden, weaving through linen-covered tables and guests still buzzing with second-hand joy. Dusk had fallen. The sky was fading, and the string lights overhead had taken over. Someone lit citronella candles, the smell sharp and metallic. I hadn't eaten much, so I walked toward the water station. That's when it happened. A blonde woman I didn't recognize, early 40s, satin dress too tight, strode up and, without a smile or a word of hesitation, handed me her purse. "Could you hold this just a sec? I need to fix my shoe." She spoke like I was already doing her a favor, like I was there to help. Before I could respond, she crouched, adjusting a heel. Her clutch felt expensive, minimalist, no receipts, no scratches. I scanned the area, waiting for someone to laugh or say she was joking. No one did. A server carrying crab cakes caught my eye, then looked away. When the woman stood, she grabbed her purse back like I was furniture. No thank you. No acknowledgement. I stood there for a beat, stunned, then quietly made my way to the lawn's edge. I thought, what about me said, not family? But the better question was, what made her assume I worked here? Maybe it was the navy dress, plain, no glitter, no fuss. Maybe it was the bun, the muted lipstick. Or maybe it was how I hovered too often, stayed out of the frame, behind the scenes. Useful. Weeks earlier, I'd been CC'd on a florist email. A sample arrangement needed approval. Simone forwarded it with the subject line, "Sending to Phoebe, logistics." That was it. Not Phoebe, sister of the bride. Not even Ms. Brandt. Just a task. No one else in the thread had a title. No one else was reduced to parentheses. I reread it 3 times. My stomach dropped. But I didn't respond. Because I knew it wasn't a mistake. When they define you by function, I thought, they forget you're a person. Later, I wandered behind the tent, near the catering carts and folding chairs. I knew my seat would still be empty. One of the servers walked past with a tray of mini tarts. He paused. "You sure you're not one of us?" he asked, grinning gently. I blinked. Didn't know whether to laugh or nod. He didn't wait for an answer, just held out a tart. "You look like you could use sugar." I took it. It tasted like lemon and disappointment. I didn't belong at the bridal table. I wasn't welcome among the guests. Maybe I was part of the staff, just not on payroll. Inside the tent, the laughter spiked. Someone must have given a toast. Another glowing story about Delphine's grace under pressure. I looked toward the tent. The light inside flickered warmly against gauzy panels. That light had never quite reached me. And suddenly, I understood something. Maybe I stayed quiet all this time because the moment I spoke, I wouldn't be mistaken for staff anymore. I'd be labeled a problem. I stayed at the edge of the cocktail garden a little longer, just long enough to watch the next round of toasts echo out under the tent. Each story someone told about Delphine was met with gleaming smiles and choreographed gasps, like the room had agreed ahead of time which jokes to laugh at and which memories to clap for. Eventually, I slipped back inside. Not out of interest, but because my feet were cramping and the mosquitoes had found me. I moved along the side of the tent, keeping to the shadows like a roadie at a concert, blending in with servers adjusting drink trays and catering staff rolling in dessert carts. And that's when I saw him. 2 tables from the sweetheart table, seated directly in Delphine's line of sight. Blake. Clean-shaven, navy suit, relaxed, like this wasn't a room full of ghosts for him. I hadn't seen him in 2 years. Not since the night I learned he'd been seeing someone behind my back. Someone who, as it turned out, used to sit beside me at Thanksgiving dinners. I told Delphine everything back then. She was the one I called when I found the text messages. And now, there he was, laughing, Comfortable. Wearing the exact cologne I once bought him for Christmas when I thought we still had a future. A woman at the next table leaned toward me and whispered, "I think he was Delphine's college buddy. He flew in from Colorado. Must have been close." "College buddy?" He turned his head, caught my eye, and then he nodded. Just a slow, polite nod, like you give a coworker you once shared an elevator with too many times. That was it. I didn't nod back. I kept walking toward the buffet, trying not to look like my stomach had tied itself in a knot. I wasn't hungry, but moving gave me something to do. From behind me, the newlyweds made their way through the tent, table by table, doing the rounds like politicians before an election. They were gracious, all hand squeezes and compliments. When they reached my row, I froze. Delphine was less than 4 feet away. She leaned over a guest, laughed at something he said, her hand brushing her husband's back. Then she turned and walked right past me. No pause, no glance. Not even that tight-lipped "thanks for coming" nod. I stood still. If she looked at me, maybe she'd have to remember that I existed before her wedding hashtag. Maybe she'd have to acknowledge what she'd built her whole weekend on. But she didn't. She moved on to the next table, like I wasn't even standing there. And no one, not one person, blinked at the fact that I hadn't been greeted. One older couple actually smiled at me, like I might be refilling the drinks. And I just stood there, sandwiched between 2 flower columns I helped her pick. I remembered the vendor, the swatches, how we sat on her porch debating whether cream or ivory looked better against eucalyptus. They didn't forget me. They made a decision. I moved toward the dessert station, past the chocolate fountains and tiny eclairs. I didn't take anything. Didn't want to. Because in that moment, right there, under soft lighting and curated perfection, something inside me hardened. Delphine wasn't my sister anymore. She was just someone I happened to be related to, and I couldn't tell which hurt more, that she walked past me, or that I expected it. By the time I made it back to my assigned seat, most of the main tent had already shifted into that post-dinner haze, half-full plates pushed aside, waiters weaving through conversations, someone somewhere always laughing louder than necessary. I lowered myself into the chair gently, partly because my feet were sore, but mostly because I didn't want the chair to squeak again and remind anyone that I existed. In front of me sat a woman I'd never seen before. Her curls were perfect, her laugh even more so, directed toward a man who wore his tie loose like he thought it made him charming. Based on the way she touched his shoulder, I guessed she was his date. I looked around the table. No one I recognized. The entire group looked like they were on a break from something else. Vendors, +1s, and me. This wasn't just overflow seating. This was the place where they sent the people they didn't want in the photos. Simone passed by. She caught my eye for a split second, then looked straight through me like I was part of the linen. This wasn't just a seating oversight, I thought. This was a message. You don't belong here either. My napkin was still folded, untouched. A waiter came by and cleared the place setting next to mine, muttering something about miscounts. I didn't ask. A few minutes later, Aunt Cora appeared like she had wandered in from a side room. She wore her usual floral print and an expression like she was trying to solve a riddle. "Oh, Phoebe," she said, her voice lilting. "I didn't see your name on the table chart. I thought maybe you didn't come." "I've been here since noon," I answered, not even bothering to smile. Cora's eyes blinked once, then narrowed slightly, like she wasn't sure what to say. "Oh, maybe they updated the chart last minute. You're still helping with things, right?" I paused, just long enough for her to feel it. Not anymore. She didn't respond to that, just gave me a soft, "well," and moved on to greet someone else. It didn't hurt, exactly. It just confirmed everything I already knew. When they don't include you in the design, it's not an accident when you don't show up in the layout. The string banner above the guest book table had names stitched in gold cursive. Delphine, Austin, bridesmaids, groomsmen, family. My name wasn't there. Not even as a footnote. A couple passed me talking about the gift bags and how Delphine always does everything right. Another said she couldn't wait for the brunch tomorrow. I hadn't received an invite to that either. As people drifted off to dance or loiter at the dessert table, I pulled out my phone and stared at the blank screen. No new texts, nothing from Mom, no check-in, no acknowledgement. And for the first time, I didn't feel anxious about it. You reach a point where being ignored is less painful than being noticed as a mistake. So I sat, back straight, eyes forward, like a sculpture no one had ordered. I didn't text anyone, didn't open social media. Instead, I opened the Notes app. And I started writing, not to anyone. Not for sympathy, just facts. How the name tag said, +1. How the memory box got credited to Aunt Evelyn. How the photo board cropped me out. How my seat was behind someone's date. I wasn't documenting for drama. I was preserving history. Because I didn't leave, not yet. But I started drafting my exit without telling a soul. The music shifted again, more upbeat now, something vaguely familiar that I couldn't name but knew I'd forget by morning. I pushed myself up from the table where I'd been pretending to sip water and stepped out of the tent into the cooler night air. I wasn't expecting her to follow, but I should have known. Maureen always liked to tie up loose ends, even if she left the stitching crooked. I heard the click of her heels before I saw her silhouette. She paused beside me, hands clasped like she was holding on to something she couldn't quite say. "Phoebe," she started softly, like I was a house pet about to bolt. "Please don't cause a scene. This is Delphine's day." I turned toward her, slow and level. "I've been here since morning. What scene have I caused, other than breathing?" She flinched, barely. But it was enough. She looked over her shoulder like someone might overhear. "She's just under a lot of pressure. Big crowd, important people. It's not the time to stir things up." I almost laughed. "You're asking me not to react, but you haven't asked her not to act." She didn't answer that. Just stood there for a beat too long and then nodded, like the conversation had somehow ended itself. After she left, I pulled my phone out of my clutch to check the time. 7:47. A message lit up the screen. It was from Darla, the wedding MC. "Darla? Hey!" I wasn't supposed to say anything, but Delphine asked me to leave your name off the thank you list during toasts. Just wanted to avoid tension. I stared at the message, read it once, then again. They hadn't just forgotten me. They'd erased me on purpose, proactively, strategically. They were afraid that hearing my name would break the spell. I typed a response. Deleted it. Tried again. Deleted that too. There was no version of the truth that would land gently with someone who had already rewritten the script. Instead, I tucked the phone away and started walking along the outer path that circled the tent. The lanterns along the gravel walk cast a warm, washed-out glow that caught on the edges of fallen leaves. Everything was manicured. Nothing left to chance. This wasn't a mistake, I thought. This was policy. From where I stood near the edge of the pond, I could hear the laughter from inside the tent. A ripple of applause, a glass clinking. Probably another story about how Delphine handled a college group project with grace and leadership. I looked down at my reflection. The water caught me, distorted me slightly with the ripple from a breeze, but I was still there, still standing, still not invited in. I didn't feel rage. Not exactly. It was something sharper, but quieter. Resolve. I didn't need to scream, didn't need to interrupt the toast, or stand up and make a speech that would get twisted the second it touched someone else's mouth. I just needed to stop pretending this didn't hurt. That it hadn't always hurt. I picked up a small rock from the edge of the path and skipped it across the water. It bounced twice, and then disappeared without sound. And that's when I knew, really knew, that I wasn't part of this performance. I was just the backstage crew who had finally stepped into the light. Next time someone asked me not to ruin the day, I'd remind them I wasn't the one who scripted it. I stayed near the water's edge just long enough to collect myself, not because I was fragile, but because I didn't want to walk back into that tent looking like I needed saving. The sun had dipped fully now. Lanterns glowed under the tent like fireflies caught mid-conversation. The air smelled like roasted meat and cloying sugar, and my stomach reminded me I hadn't eaten since mid-morning. I moved toward the buffet line, trying to blend with the latecomers. A young server held a tablet and a worried smile. "Name?" "Phoebe Brandt," I said. He scanned the screen, tapped, scanned again. I don't see a meal listed. Any dietary notes?" "Yes. Vegetarian, no dairy," I said plainly. He blinked. "Sorry, you're not on the list." I took a breath. "I emailed that in weeks ago, got a confirmation from the planner's assistant." He motioned to a woman a few feet away, clipboard in hand and hair pulled too tight. She looked up as if I'd interrupted something vital. "We don't have you marked for a dietary meal," she said, voice already dismissive. "You can grab whatever's left after table 14. "Which table is 14? I asked. She pointed toward the far corner, where cake plates were already being passed. So that meant nothing warm, no apology, no concern. Just another small erasure, served cold. I walked back to my table and sat down, resisting the urge to crumple my napkin just for the satisfaction of ruining something. Instead, I reached into my clutch and pulled out the granola bar I always carried for emergencies. Apparently, this qualified. I unwrapped it slowly, took a small bite, chewed like it mattered. Somewhere behind me, laughter built again. I scrolled my phone absently, trying to anchor myself to something dull. That's when I saw it. A guest, someone I didn't know, had posted a story to Instagram. It was a video. Shaky, low light, poorly framed, but unmistakable. Me, seated alone near the catering corridor. Head down. Chewing. The caption read, "Staff breakin' hard." I stared at it. The post wasn't tagged, but the comments rolled in. "Is that the wedding planner? I thought she was part of the family?" "Nope, she's always back there." Always back there. Simone texted me within 5 minutes. "Simone, you shouldn't be sitting there. People are talking." I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have words, but because none of the ones I wanted to say could be softened enough to fit through her filter of image management. Instead, I saved the video to my phone. I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I didn't even sigh. I just sat. Because the joke wasn't the story. The story was the silence that followed it. No one, not Delphine, not Mom, not a single cousin, said a word in the comments. No defense, no correction. They saw it. They let it stand. This isn't about food, I thought. This isn't about being left off a list. It was about place, position, and I'd never been given one. If they were going to serve me last, I'd make sure they remembered who stayed hungry. After saving the Instagram video to my phone, I slipped the device back into my purse like I'd tucked away evidence. I stood slowly, smoothed the front of my dress, and walked toward the restrooms on the far end of the venue. Not because I needed to go, but because I needed somewhere quiet, somewhere that didn't smell like champagne foam or burnt buttercream. It was quieter in the side hallway, dim, except for 2 sconces flickering along the wall, casting strange shadows. As I leaned against the cool plaster, I overheard 2 voices behind a curtain separating the staff corridor. One woman, maybe a vendor or part of the floral team, said lightly, "You know, I think a couple folks here weren't even originally listed. Bride said to squeeze them in if there was space." The second voice laughed softly, the kind of laugh people use when they're pretending to be generous. "Yeah, I had to rearrange 3 tables this week. One girl's name popped up, like 3 days ago. No entree preference or anything." Then a pause. "I think her name was Phoebe." I didn't move. I didn't say a word. But my spine did something new. It straightened, like my body was tired of curling into the version of myself they allowed. A planner assistant peeked out from around the curtain and blinked when she saw me. She gave a tight smile. "Oh, hi. I think you're seated by the catering entrance, right?" I held her gaze. "I am." She hesitated, flipping a page on her clipboard like it might rewrite history. Looks like you were added in overflow. No big deal. Just, last-minute adjustments. I didn't ask her to explain. I already knew. I hadn't missed the RSVP deadline. I just hadn't been on the list at all. As I stepped back into the corridor, my phone buzzed. I figured it was another weather alert, or maybe a text from Simone asking if I could help with cleanup. But no, it was from her. Simone, you've been pretty chill, but maybe don't ruin this now. People are watching. Delphine's boss is here. No greeting, no context, no apology. Just a warning dressed as advice. I stared at the message. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I typed, "Tell Delphine I don't need the mic. I already have the truth." I let the words sit there, pixelated and perfect. Then I hit delete, because saying it to Simone wouldn't matter. She didn't care what was true. She cared what looked tidy. And the thing about people like her? They're only uncomfortable when you show them what they've carefully edited out. I walked back toward the buffet line, not because I wanted food, but because I needed a surface to lean on, and opened my notes app. The draft was already there, half written. I added more. Screenshot of the cracked chair. Photo of the gift I gave, now attributed to someone else. A forward of the email confirming my dietary restrictions, never honored. The Instagram video of me chewing granola beside a mop bucket. Then I typed a single line. Not flowery, not bitter. I helped build this wedding. I was almost erased from it, but ghosts leave records too. I didn't post it, not yet. I just saved it, drafted, loaded. Sometimes the most powerful speech is the one you don't deliver, yet. The tent had started to empty slightly. People moving toward the fire pit, lighting cigars, slipping off heels, loosening ties. I moved with them, but not really among them. I stood at the edge of it all, where the music softened into the night air and the string lights barely reached the gravel path. There was no wind, no momentous signal, just a feeling that finally settled over me. It was time. I pulled out my phone, tapped the screen, opened the gallery. The image was already selected. The chair. The cheap plastic one taped at the back leg. The one marked with a crooked label that read +1, slapped on like a joke that got funnier every time someone ignored it. I didn't add a caption, no filter, no call-out. I hit post. The app blinked once, and the photo joined the feed, sliding between curated shots of first dances and designer centerpieces, between laughter and love, and Delphine's rehearsed perfection. I slipped the phone back into my bag and walked inside. Not rushed, not smug, just steady. In less than 10 minutes, I saw it begin. A subtle shift, guests suddenly glancing down at their phones, then looking back up toward me, whispering behind champagne glasses. A bridesmaid froze mid-laugh, eyes locked on something on her screen. I stood near the drinks table and poured myself a half glass of seltzer, waited, let it breathe. Simone was the first to approach. She didn't say hello. "Phoebe, did you post that on purpose?" I didn't look away from the bubbles in my glass. "What would make you think it was an accident?" Her lips parted slightly, like she had more to say, but nothing made it out. She turned and walked off, back into the blur of bodies and music. No one else confronted me. But the difference was tangible. Delphine didn't come over. She didn't call me out or ask me to delete it. But she saw it. That much was clear. People started skimming around me like I was a hazard, a warning light. And I didn't mind. I didn't flinch. I found my chair again, the one tucked near the server's exit, and sat back down. Quietly. Visibly. This time, I didn't try to be small. There were no words in the post, but somehow, everyone heard me. It wasn't revenge, it was record-keeping. Every moment I'd swallowed, every name I hadn't been called, every seat I wasn't offered. It had always been stacking. And tonight, I gave it form. I became a mirror, and no one liked what they saw. For the rest of the evening, I sat still while the party moved awkwardly around me. People danced harder, laughed louder, like they were compensating for something they didn't know how to apologize for. Nobody said anything, but they all felt it. And if that photo unsettled them, the caption I hadn't written yet would finish the job. I didn't check my phone again right away. I didn't need to. The tension inside the tent had shifted, tighter, like a thread pulled one tug too far. People moved differently now. Conversations stalled mid-sentence when I walked past, like I'd become an echo no one wanted to admit they heard. When I finally glanced at my screen, there it was. A new message. Simone. Simone, what are you doing, Phoebe? You're making her look bad. This could tank her at work. Just take it down. No, hey! No, how are you? Just panic dressed up like concern. I stared at it for a while, then typed back. So you know it's true then. I never hit send. Didn't need to. Some truths are best served without commentary. They didn't want peace. They wanted silence, neatly gift-wrapped and passed around as harmony. So I let them keep their version of peace, but not without a mirror. I took a slow walk past the sweetheart table again, not because I had business there, but because I was curious to see who still sat near the throne. Blake was still there, laughing, comfortable, a drink in his hand, the exact cocktail he used to order at our favorite bar, back when I still thought he told me everything. He didn't speak when I passed, didn't even flinch, but I saw his eyes drop briefly to my phone screen as it lit up with another message. Someone else sharing the post. He knew. He knew why I posted it, and he still stayed seated. At her table. I didn't expect him to get up, not really, but I think part of me wanted him to look uncomfortable, to shift in his chair, maybe to glance my way with something resembling regret. He didn't, so I kept walking. The music had picked up again, trying to drag the evening back to the script. A line dance started, a conga line formed. Laughter roared like an engine being revved a little too hard. The MC chirped something about cupcakes and late-night s'mores. I stood by the guest book table. The banner above it read, "Thank you for being part of our forever." I scanned the pages. Dozens of entries, handwritten notes, doodles, glitter pens. Mine wasn't there. I had stopped asking for inclusion, but I was still learning how exclusion worked. It's not always loud, not a slap or a door slammed shut. Sometimes it's just a blank space where your name should have been. A missing seat, a skipped mention, a silence that looks a lot like decorum. I watched a little girl twirl in front of the photo booth as her mother adjusted her bow. Someone walked by and said, "She looks just like her Aunt Delphine." I wanted to say, "She also looks like me," but I didn't, because that was the thing. The people here weren't interested in resemblance. They were interested in reflection, and I didn't reflect what they wanted to see. So they looked away. They wanted a perfect memory. I gave them an accurate one instead. By the time I made it back home, the wedding was long over. My heels came off first, tossed near the doorway with a thud that echoed more like punctuation than relief. The apartment was still, dim, except for the kitchen light I always left on, and the faint hum of the fridge reminded me the world outside the reception had kept turning. I set my clutch on the table, kicked the door closed, and took a slow breath. Then I opened my laptop. Not for emails, not for work, just to upload what they'd forgotten I'd been recording all along. I scrolled through my phone's gallery, past screenshots, awkward selfies, and then paused on the one video that mattered. Less than a minute long, shaky, informal. But it said everything. It was me. No makeup, no spotlight. Standing in a field beside the venue 4 days before the wedding. Arranging flowers. Helping the caterer unload chairs. Talking to the florist about windproofing the centerpieces. My voice could be heard faintly behind the lens. "Let's move the table a little west. The light hits better at 5 p.m. It was nothing flashy, nothing emotional, just evidence. I posted it to the same platform where the chair photo had lived. Caption: I helped build the wedding. You just chose not to see me. No hashtags, no filters, just facts. Then I closed the laptop, sat down on the couch, and waited. I wasn't even halfway through a glass of water before my phone buzzed. Once. Twice. Then nonstop. Comments came first. Wait, she did all this? She's the sister. Why wasn't she part of the bridal party? This is heartbreaking. Someone I hadn't spoken to since high school shared the post with the comment, "This is why I hate curated weddings. Too many people erased for the aesthetic." Then came the DMs. Delphine's coworker, "This is disappointing. It changes how I see her." A cousin I hadn't seen in years. "I always wondered why you looked like a stranger in those photos." And Simone, "Of course, Simone." Simone, "Take this down. It's getting out of hand." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Visibility isn't revenge, it's correction. They ruined the day. I just turned on the lights. I remembered what Mom said hours earlier. "Don't ruin this for her." Her tone, her face, like she was warning me not to throw gasoline on a wedding gown. But what if it had already been burning? What if I was just standing near the smoke? The post climbed in views, shared, reposted, quoted in people's stories. For once, my absence wasn't quiet. For once, I wasn't being whispered about. I was being read out loud. And not because I screamed, but because I finally said something at all. It wasn't a tantrum, it was a ledger. They thought I'd just sit through it, nod, and disappear like usual. But they forgot something critical. Ghosts leave records too. And I wasn't haunting them with anger. I was reminding them I existed. Because you don't get to shame the person you tried to erase for showing up on film. I woke to a screen full of missed calls. 13, to be exact. 2 from Delphine, 4 from Simone, the rest split between Mom and unknown. The kind of calls you get not because someone is worried, but because they've been caught. I didn't listen to the voicemails right away. I let them sit, lined up like a jury, waiting for me to pretend I owed them something. Instead, I went into the kitchen, made tea, and let the water boil over once, before I remembered I was making it. Eventually, I pressed play. Mom's voice, low and controlled. "You made your point. Can we move past this now?" Then Delphine's text came through. "This is affecting things beyond just us. Please don't take it further." Simone again. "You win. Can we move on?" I stared at those words for a long time. "You win." Like this was a contest. Like I'd flipped the table instead of simply pulling up a chair that was mine to begin with. Not one of them said it. The word that mattered. Sorry. Because that's what people like them do. They circle the apology without touching it. They manage optics, not impact. I set the phone down and opened the laptop again. Not to post, but to watch. Just to remember that I had proof, and that proof had a pulse. The video was still climbing in views, reposts, comments, some anonymous, some uncomfortably familiar. "She's the sister? What in the world?" How do you forget someone who helped build it all? The silence from the family speaks volumes. I didn't respond to any of them, but I read every word. Not because I needed validation, but because this time I wasn't the one who had to explain. It wasn't the attention I wanted. It was the clarity I needed. For so long, I thought if I kept quiet, they'd notice the absence and pull me in. But the truth? Some people only miss you when they need something. And when they don't, you become background. You become convenient to forget. So I gave them something they couldn't forget. I opened my calendar and deleted the recurring reminder for Delphine and Austin's anniversary gift. Unfollowed her. Muted Simone. Boxed up the wedding gift I had planned. An engraved frame with their names, the one I'd spent 2 hours choosing fonts for. I slid it to the back of my closet, beneath old tax folders and winter scarves. Then I grabbed a sticky note and wrote just one sentence. Closure doesn't always knock. I stuck it inside the kitchen cabinet, a place I'd see it often, just in case I ever forgot that the door doesn't always slam. Sometimes it just stays closed. Not locked, not barricaded, just no longer open. I didn't call anyone that day. Didn't post another thing. Didn't check if they were still talking about me online. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about letting go. It's not a grand declaration. It's a choice made in increments. One boundary, one silence, one deletion at a time. and I was finally getting good at it. This wasn't reconciliation, it was release. The morning light didn't feel like a new beginning. It felt like a quiet ending that didn't need to be announced. I brewed coffee like I always did. 2 scoops, filtered water, that chipped mug with the faded, "Not today, Satan" slogan. No text, no calendar alert, just air and space and silence. At 9:17, a notification buzzed. A cousin I barely speak to forwarded me an invite to the post-wedding brunch. The message said, "Thought you'd want this? Maybe it was sent to spam?" It hadn't been. It had been sent to someone else, to be passed to me. Like a crumpled napkin no one wanted to place directly in my hand. I didn't respond. I didn't go. There was nothing left to be seated for. I'd already stood for myself. I cleaned the kitchen instead. Not aggressively, just enough to feel like I had control over something. Scrubbed the counter, rinsed the fruit bowl, tossed out the invitation, gently folded, into the trash. At 10:30, my phone lit up again. "Mom. Maureen, just tell me you're not going to ruin the holidays too." I stared at it for a full minute, typed, "The holidays ruined themselves." Then backspaced every letter. Some things are better left unsent. I didn't block her. I muted the thread. That felt more powerful. The difference between a slammed door and one quietly closed from the inside. I opened my laptop, clicked into my social media account, and scrolled. The chair photo, the video, the post. They were still there, untouched. I didn't delete them. I didn't hide them. But I didn't speak of them again either. Let them sit like testimony, not tantrum. I boxed up the frame I had ordered for Delphine and Austin, still wrapped in bubble wrap, the corner already yellowing from sun exposure where it had sat on my shelf too long. I didn't throw it away. I tucked it in a bin in the hall closet, beneath things that didn't fit anymore. I walked to my desk and opened a draft email I had written weeks before, when I still believed I might be asked to give a speech at the rehearsal dinner. It said, "You lost a sister. I reclaimed a self." I didn't hit send. I deleted it. Not out of forgiveness, but because some things don't need to be spoken twice. Then I whispered to myself, like a blessing. They wanted me quiet. They didn't realize silence has weight. And in that moment, I felt something shift. Not triumph, not pride. Just enough. This time, I wasn't disappearing. I was simply no longer showing up where I was erased. The week passed without drama. No more texts, no voicemails. The silence became something I stopped checking for and simply accepted. It was no longer waiting to be broken. It had settled in like furniture, something you learn to walk around. On Sunday morning, I opened my closet, reaching for a sweater, and saw it again. The envelope I had folded over and taped shut. Inside, the original chair label, still creased, still marked in faded ink. +1. I didn't frame it, didn't shred it either. I slid it into a plastic sleeve and placed it in a file folder labeled "Kept Receipts." Not for revenge, for memory. I used to keep things because they reminded me of good moments. But this? This I kept because I needed to remember what it had cost me to stay quiet for so long. Later that afternoon, I walked to the lake a few blocks from my apartment. It wasn't much. A man-made park, a few ducks, a line of benches with names etched into plaques. I brought my journal, not my phone. The first bench I passed was already taken. An older woman in a windbreaker was tossing breadcrumbs to a crowd of pushy mallards. I sat on the next one. We didn't speak at first. Just the quiet thump of wings and the occasional squawk from a duck who'd arrived too late for the bread. After a few minutes, she glanced over and said, "Funny how some people spend their lives waiting for someone to make room." I smiled. Not polite, genuine. "Sometimes you realize you've been standing for so long," I said. "You forgot you could sit somewhere else." She nodded once and turned back to the water. She didn't ask for details. Didn't need them. That kind of woman, the kind who feeds ducks and says things like that, already knows what it means to not be invited and to show up anyway. Back home, I opened my journal to a blank page. Not to write about Delphine or Simone or the wedding. Just about me. For the first time, I didn't frame it around what they'd done. I didn't write in reaction. I wrote in declaration. I am allowed to exist beyond what I am to other people. I paused, then added, I can outgrow roles I never agreed to play. I closed the journal, set it on the coffee table, and walked to the window. Outside, the sky had gone lavender, just before it folds into dark. There were still things that hurt, still corners I avoided, still songs I couldn't hear without flinching, but I no longer waited for someone to make room for me. Forgiveness, I'd realized, doesn't mean reunion. It just means I no longer carry it in my hands like a dish I need someone to take. They wrote me out. I wrote myself back in, on my own page. I may not have had a seat at their table, but I'll build my own, and this time, the name card will be mine.